get into the evening, so bear that in mind for Saturday evening, particularly if you've got plans to go to a firework display. Could be a bit of a soggy one across the southeast. Elsewhere, we'll see some showers, and that's how we go into Sunday. There'll be some sunny spells, but there will continue to be some pretty heavy showers around too.
Monday on GB News. Join my new show, Bev Turner Today, from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello and welcome to a brand new show with me, Andrew Pierce. We didn't know what to call it, so we called it Andrew Pierce. I'm with you right through until 3 p.m. And coming up on the show today, the row over Home Secretary Suella Braverman. Was she right to visit the Manston migrant facility by helicopter? Mark White will be here with me in the studio. The continuing fallout from the Bank of England's huge interest rate hike. And I'm afraid there's a raft of new taxes on the way. We're going to be hearing from small businesses on how they're coping. Rishi Sunak's faith, what it means to Hindus up and down the country to have our first Hindu Prime Minister. We'll speak to the director of the Conservative Friends of India. More rail chaos on the way as the country braces for even more strikes. We'll be hearing from a Tory MP on the Transport Select Committee. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined later by the legendary lyricist Sir Tim Rice. He's got a new musical in the West End and he'll be with me from 2 o'clock to talk about all the news of the day. Also, I want to hear your views. Email me at gbviews@gbnewsuk and we'll try to get some of you on air with me during the next 3 hours. Lots more coming up too, but first the latest news with Rhiannon.
Andrew, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The government's under increasing pressure to balance the books after the Bank of England warned the UK is facing the longest recession in a century. The Chancellor's reportedly looking at raising capital gains tax, which is imposed on the sale of assets, as well as dividend tax to address the £50 billion black hole in public finances. The Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk is also under review as part of spending cuts. The new site was part of Boris Johnson's final policy speech as he sought to make energy security part of his legacy as Prime Minister. Critics have argued it'll be expensive and take years to build. The HS2 high-speed rail line in the north of England and other major projects are also being assessed. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there'll be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February. Scotland's First Minister says she regrets delays in the delivery of 2 ferries, which are both late and over budget. The vessels are due to be delivered next year and early in 2024 at a potential cost of more than £300 million, 3 times the initial contract. Nicola Sturgeon's giving evidence before a committee of MSPs investigating their construction. After audit, Scotland said there have been a multitude of failings.
Obviously, this is still a live project, regrettably so, and the Scottish Government remains absolutely committed to delivering both ferries and supporting our island communities that rely so heavily on vessels of this type on a daily basis.
2 people have been charged following disorder on Halloween in Dundee. Emergency services, including riot police, responded after bonfires and fireworks were lit on streets in the Kirkton area. The 28-year-old woman and a 15-year-old boy have been charged with alleged mobbing and rioting offences. They're expected in court on Friday. Strike action by hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport could affect football fans heading to the World Cup in Qatar. Unite Union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. They include ground handling and cargo staff. The World Cup kicks off in just over 2 weeks, and the union says it expects Qatar Airways to be hit heavily by the strike action. Twitter employees have been told they'll receive an email by 4 p.m. telling them if they've lost their job. Offices have been temporarily closed and the access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as the new boss Elon Musk works to find around £1 billion in annual savings. He fired the chief executive as well as top finance and legal executives when he took over last week. Donald Trump has dropped one of his strongest hints yet that he may run for the White House again.
In order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay? Very, very, very probably.
Speaking to a crowd in Iowa, the former US president teased a strong possibility of a comeback. It's the first of 4 rallies in 5 days for the Republican as he campaigns for candidates in next week's midterm elections. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden will be rallying with former President Barack Obama on Saturday in Pennsylvania. A man who had COVID for 411 days has finally tested negative. The 59-year-old's thought to have had the virus longer than anybody else in the world. Doctors say he's finally clear of an early variant of COVID thanks to a cocktail of drugs. The man has a weakened immune system as a result of a kidney transplant and first tested positive in December 2020. And the King will host a reception at Buckingham Palace this afternoon for business figures and NGOs ahead of COP27 in Egypt. More than 200 guests from across the globe will attend. The Prime Minister will be among them after his U-turn on attending the UN Climate Change Summit next week. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Andrew Pearce.
Hello and welcome to my brand new show. I'm going to be with you every Friday lunchtime. And I want to hear your views, so do email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we will try to get some of you on air. First, though, let's get stuck into one of our top stories of the day, of the week. If you're watching me, Andrew Pearce on GB News, new tax rises are on the way to fix the government's fiscal black hole. The Bank of England has announced its latest interest rate decision, the biggest rise for 30 years, raising the base rate by 0.75%. Now at 3%, it's the sharpest increase since Black Wednesday. That was when John Major was Prime Minister. It's driving up borrowing costs to where they were back in 2008. And the Bank of England has also warned we're in for perhaps the longest recession in a century. And with the autumn budget fast approaching, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, guess what? They're reviewing major infrastructure projects, including a major high-speed rail line in Northern England and nuclear plant size we'll see, as they try to find £50 billion in savings and tax hikes. And it also reported that Jeremy Hunt could be set to launch a capital gains tax raid. Well, let's now cross over to Westminster. We're going to speak to GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, doom and gloom. It's a Conservative government. They've already raised the tax burden to the highest level in 70 years. Mortgage rates are going to soar, and every newspaper today is filled with stories about rises in capital gains tax, taxes on people's shares. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult position that this Conservative Prime Minister and Chancellor find themselves in. Of course, both of them have always claimed that they want to be a small state, low tax sort of a party, but that doesn't seem to be reflected at all in the budget, apparently because of the very difficult economic situation that we find ourselves in. It's been said all week that they're going to have to make £50 billion worth of savings in public sector cuts and tax rises, but their options are pretty limited. In terms of tax rises, as you say, the burden's already at a 70-year high. So all they can really consider is sort of corporation tax rise, which is clearly not very consistent with a pro-growth agenda, but at least it has the benefit of people sort of feel that it won't affect them too badly if it's levied at businesses. Then you've got this capital gains tax rise. They're thinking of bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax, but obviously that's created a huge backlash with business leaders who feel that it's not an incentive to invest and not an incentive for enterprise. As far as public spending cuts can go, some people are saying that what they're going to do is freeze the public sector pay or raise it by only 2%. The unions demanding 10%, so that would mean a massive fight with the unions. And they can cut big infrastructure projects, such as that train line that you're talking about in the north. But again, that's not at all consistent with the growth agenda or with the levelling up agenda, which was central to the 2019 manifesto. So there's very, very little wiggle room for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. And as you say, they're doing it against a backdrop of these very high, rising interest rates, which are very high by the standards of the last 20 years or so, which will put so much pressure on people's mortgages.
We shouldn't forget, should we, Olivia, that Rishi Sunak, in his campaign to be Tory leader, when he was beaten by Liz Truss, pledged to cut the basic rate of income tax by the end of this Parliament. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, pledged to cut corporation tax to 15%. He's raising it to 25%. How do they justify what they're doing with what they were saying just a few weeks ago?
Well, absolutely. And I think one thing that we quite often forget is that Jeremy Hunt has consistently promised very low tax policies during that Conservative leadership campaign. He's often presented as a sort of figure of the left of the party, but he was actually promising the lowest taxes. So how they square the rises they're making now with what they promised then is quite tricky. One thing that they can say is that the economic situation has changed so drastically during the summer that they have no other choice. In other words, pin it all on Liz Truss. The other argument that I've heard from a couple of Rishi Sunak allies, which is quite interesting, but I'm not sure it'll hold water, is that Rishi Sunak didn't actually win the leadership election over the summer. He lost it, so he doesn't really have a mandate to carry out any of the promises that he made then. What he does have a mandate for is sticking to the 2019 manifesto. So as long as he sort of sticks to the spirit of that, he's not really obliged by his promises to do anything else. But as I say, it's hard to see how that's going to hold water when Labour are flinging at him that he's making U-turns left, right and centre.
Just finally, what's the reaction of Tory MPs, Olivia, to this? Because they'll look at the opinion polls showing they're about 25, 26 points behind. This statement that's coming on November the 17th is clearly going to be more doom and gloom from a Conservative government. As we've already said, it's taxing people more than at any time in 70 years. It's going to be an even bigger tax burden in the run-up to Christmas.
Yeah, and most of the Conservative MPs I've spoken to at the moment are still just so relieved that Rishi Sunak's now in position, that the party's looking more stable than it has for probably about a year now. So they're saying only good things about the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. But, as you sort of hint, I think by the time the budget comes out and they see how much pressure their constituents are going to be under in the run-up to Christmas, the cost of living crisis is basically guaranteed to get worse, not better, in the next few months. They'll be under a lot of pressure in their constituency, especially when they're there over the Christmas recess. And it could be that they start to turn on that Prime Minister, who they were throwing their weight behind in such great numbers only 2 weeks ago.
Olivia Utley, who's GB News' political correspondent in Westminster. Call me old-fashioned, but Tories, aren't they supposed to be about cutting taxes? Are about to go into a recession, and yet they're raising taxes across the board. With Christmas, though, round the corner, you might expect our high streets to be heaving with shoppers, but it seems that's not the case. Bleak figures from the British Retail Consortium show total UK footfall down nearly 12% in October compared with 3 years ago. Retail parks and shopping centres are all seeing a decline in visitors, and it comes after the Bank of England yesterday warned of a 2-year recession. So will people be even more reluctant to spend their money, and what does it mean for local businesses? Joining me now from Uxbridge, GB News London reporter Alice Porter. Alice, where are you? Tell us where you are.
Hi there. Yes, I'm here at Horsepower Hairdressing in Uxbridge, one of the small businesses that is operating here, and certainly affected by this news out today that we're seeing a shortfall in the number of people coming to the high street as small businesses are dealing with that, but also dealing with soaring energy costs. And the owner of the Barbers joins me now, Adam Davis. Adam, thanks very much for letting me come along today. I mean, how are you? Have you been finding business recently? Are you surprised by the figures out today showing that there is a huge decrease the number of people coming to our high streets?
Well, I don't think COVID has helped us. Obviously, the cost of living's not helping us. We're losing big names off the high street as well. Debenhams have gone. A lot of people used to come in for that, and then their partners would maybe come here while they were shopping. So there's a lot of contributing factors.
Now, some people might think that hairdressing, barbershops wouldn't be affected by the number of people coming to the high street because people still need to have their hair cut, but is that not quite the case?
I think online shopping, believe it or not, you think, how can that affect a hairdressing salon? But if they're not coming to the high street, they're not... they're not shopping here. It's the coffee shops lose out, we lose out, the sandwich bar loses out. The restaurants, people might come in and shop and then stop and then go to a restaurant afterwards.
And is that changing people's habits as well? So perhaps people might not be having their cuts as well so regularly, and that's having an impact as well?
I think that's more related to the cost of living. I'm old enough to have been around for a couple of recessions, and that what usually happens is the people that come in, say every 4 weeks, will come in every 6 weeks. The once a weekers will come in once a month. People just spread it out.
And when people do come to you, I mean, I can't say I've had my hair cut in a barber's before, but when I go to the hairdressers, I definitely have a chat and I'll talk about my problems, my worries. Is that something when people do come and chat to you? When are people very concerned about the cost of living? Is that something they're sort of opening up to you about when they're having their hair cut?
That is probably our main conversation we have, about the cost of living, food prices going up, obviously the energy prices going up as well.
And in terms of the energy prices, when I was sort of looking around this salon now, I mean, you could hear the buzz of razors and there's hair dryers going and things like that. I mean, I presume your energy costs are very high. I mean, how are your bills at the moment, given energy costs?
So compared to previous financial year, we've gone up £800 a month. So we've got to find that money. We can't really pass that on to the customer. So basically the profit's getting less and less and less. And we are, just happy to be here really, just to cover costs at the moment.
Well, I know you've been here a number of years. Is it 16 years you were telling me?
That's right, yeah.
And you've got a very loyal customer with you as well. So I'm glad to see that business is going well. And you still obviously have lots of loyal customers who are coming back for repeated visits. So thanks very much for letting us come in here to Horsepower Hairdressing here in Uxbridge, one of the number of wonderful small businesses that are operating here, of course, in a difficult situation with many of them struggling with the cost of living.
Thanks. That's Alice Porter in Uxbridge. Great barber, great hair. Don't think I'd want it that colour, though. Lurid green. Well, let's cross over to Downing Street now, and we're going to speak to GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, you've just been in a Number 10 briefing. Breaking news for us?
Yes, a bit of a clarification, really, today, in terms of a story that has been brewing this morning, leading a number of bulletins across the United Kingdom. The idea that the Sizewell C, this new nuclear power plant in Suffolk, that the government may well be pulling out its investment. Well, it took them a while, but the government has now firmly slapped down those reports, saying that it's just as committed to Sizewell C as it was before. Now, this is significant because across the course of this morning, we've seen people, for example, the new leader of the Green Party cheering the reports that perhaps the government has backed out of this investment. We've seen a number of people campaigning for presumably less power generation in this country, not sure why they'd campaign for that, but they seem to, saying that it was a good thing that the government appeared to be pulling out of this. Well, some clear clarification now from the government that they are not pulling out of it, that the £700 million of investment into Sizewell C stands, and that negotiations in terms of getting the full funding for that, negotiations are going on with the company EDF in terms of getting this all set up. They are still going on and progressing. Now, it's unclear why the government took so long to clarify this point and let speculation run as wild as it did, but it seems there was over-interpretation of a line that was said from the government last night, that all capital investment is under review. People took that to mean perhaps more than they should have done.
Tom, if the government's even remotely serious about its pledge to get supply to be self-sufficient in energy, they simply have to press ahead with nuclear power stations like this one.
Certainly, and it's funny to remember back to what people were saying 10 or 12 years ago on this very subject. The complaint about nuclear power stations has always been, well, they take about a decade to build, so what's the point? Well, if we hadn't listened to that sort of doomerism a decade ago, we'd have a lot more domestic energy capacity in this country today. It's a lesson that the French learnt in the 1970s in the wake of the oil crisis. They decided to go big for nuclear. Now the French have 70% of their electricity coming from clean nuclear power stations, and guess what? They have lower energy bills than we do in the UK. It seems like a very obvious thing to go for, and interestingly, it's something that Boris Johnson tried to make a part of his legacy. I wonder how much of this is actually people looking at picking apart the legacy of Boris Johnson, because you'll remember in the final speech he made from the dispatch box of the House of Commons as Prime Minister, he said that you should not always listen to Treasury brain when it comes to investment and infrastructure, that we should go big and go for nuclear and make those investments and build those things that will serve us forward for the decades to come. Well, it sounds like the government is back on that track now, at least when it comes to nuclear investment, although it must be said other elements of the capital investment portfolio may well be being pared back. We got less equivocal answers from the Prime Minister's spokesman today when it came to Northern Powerhouse Rail. You'll remember that Liz Truss, when she was campaigning to become Prime Minister, promised a new railway station in Bradford, promised to build Northern Powerhouse Rail, as it is called, in full. Well, now this government only committing to what was called the Integrated Rail Review, the plan before Liz Truss, paring back on some of that rail investment.
All right, that's Tom Harwood, GB News political correspondent in Downing Street. So that's going to go down well behind the red wall, isn't it, if they cancel all those rail projects up north. Now, coming up, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He's the first Hindu Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Will his faith impact his decisions, and how will his premiership differ from our usual Christian leaders? We'll host a detailed discussion. Before that, though, the weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Cracking day out there, if you like, fine, bright weather through the autumn months. Lighter winds than we've been used to as well, thanks to a little ridge of high pressure. Don't get too used to it. Big area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. That deep low is staying away, but it is throwing these weather fronts towards us for tomorrow. Ahead of that, though, as I said, most places having a fine day. There are a few showers, which will keep going across parts of Cumbria, west coast of Scotland, across the far north of Scotland too, even one or two across Wales and southwest England this morning. But they're few and far between, and they'll fizzle out this afternoon. So many central and eastern areas certainly staying dry with sunny spells. And in that sunshine, temperatures getting close to average. Bit of a chill in the air first thing this morning, but feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. It is cooler than it has been, but it is going to turn milder as we go through the weekend into next week. Certainly not that mild if you're heading out this evening, however. For most, it's going to be dry and clear, and under those clear spells, it will turn quite chilly. But here comes the rain into Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England by dawn. As the rain moves in, temperatures will start to pick up again, but certainly across many eastern areas, it will be a chilly start to Saturday. Could be some pockets of frost across northeast England and eastern Scotland. Maybe a bright start in the east if you're up early enough, but it won't last. The cloud will move in, bringing outbreaks of rain for many. Northern Ireland cheers up pretty smartly, and much of Scotland will actually have a brighter afternoon, and eventually West Wales may see some sunny spells, but elsewhere staying fairly dull. It will be a little milder than today, but it won't feel all that mild with the cloud, the increasing breeze. Now, we probably won't see much rain across East Anglia and the southeast till late on. But once it's arrived, it may well linger into the evening, so bear that in mind for Saturday evening, particularly if you've got plans to go to a firework display. Could be a bit of a soggy one across the southeast. Elsewhere, we'll see some showers, and that's how we go into Sunday. There'll be some sunny spells, but there will continue to be some pretty heavy showers around too.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back. The embattled Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, well, she visited the Dover and Manston migrant processing centres yesterday, following intense criticism over the conditions at the site. It's designed to hold 1,600 people for a matter of days, but it's been used to house around 3,500 for several weeks. She's also facing legal action, of course she is, from charities over the conditions, and Downing Street was yet again forced to jump to the defence of Suella Braverman on Thursday as questions swirled about her use of a military helicopter during a visit to Kent, when she also dodged questions from the press. Well, Joining me now in the GB News home is our security editor, Mark White. Look, I'm a great fan of Suella Braverman, I've got to tell you, Mark, and she talked about an invasion of migrants on the Kent countryside across the Channel. So therefore, why wouldn't she use a military helicopter owned by the Ministry of Defence, no cost to anybody? She didn't have to rent it or lease it from a commercial company.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a complete non-issue, I have to say. She was up in that helicopter not just simply for transportation from Dover, where she was visiting the processing centre there, to then head to Manston. She was up there because she was being taken over the English Channel. She was shown the choke points where migrant boats come through, where they are intercepted by Border Force and the RNLI. That gave her an overview, and not just her, but there was an entourage there as well. So you couldn't just do it in a tiny little civilian helicopter. A Chinook was the ideal beast for that particular job. And the military have command and control of the Channel migrant situation. That is their job day in, day out. Why wouldn't the military be involved in providing the Home Secretary with a helicopter to give her an overview of what they're doing out there? Then they decided it would take her on to Manston, where she met up with the other members of the entourage that were there by vehicle. I really do think it's a complete non-issue.
And poll after poll shows that people are really fed up about what's going on across the Channel. I'm fed up, you're fed up. Do you think we've finally got a Home Secretary? She talks the talk, but who's actually going to get to grips with this issue?
Well, she certainly says she wants to do that. But what she's facing at the moment is clearly a very significant problem because of the numbers who've come over, and they're having to deal with the consequences of that. And when you get a surge, as we did at the weekend, where 1,500 people arrived in 2 days, then you can't process them in the 24 hours with the capabilities they have at the moment at Dover and Manston. So what's the next step? Do you then fund many, many more people to process them? Well, you might have to do that, but all of the time, that's costing many millions of pounds more on top of a situation where just housing them in hotels, for instance, is costing £7 million a day at £150 a head in hundreds of hotels across the country. There was another row that Suella Braverman was facing over the so-called dumping of asylum seekers at Victoria Coach Station.
Now, one of the newspapers is saying today it's happened a second time, but it's not quite as it seems, is it?
No, and the Home Office have been very robust on this in terms of denying that they ever dumped people in central London. What the policy is, you're processed, Andrew. If you arrive in a small boat, you're detained, you're taken to this processing centre, you're supposed to be bailed within 24 hours. That's not happening because of the sheer numbers, but when they can, they do. They will release you to secure accommodation, to hotels, maybe into council housing eventually, but normally hotels in the first instance. But they also have the option of allowing you to go to friends and family if you can assure them that you've got friends and family to go and stay with. So what they said was there was a group of asylum seekers who had convinced them that they had friends and family to stay with in central London. They were then taken to the location they wanted to go to, which was the Victoria area of London, deposited at Victoria Station to then go to be, the immigration officials thought, picked up by those people. Most were, 11 weren't. And when the Home Office became aware that 11 people were there, having told them previously they had places to go, but then didn't, they then made urgent arrangements for them to go to Norwich to a hotel there.
And just finally, Mark, I've noticed the BBC has finally caught up with your excellent scoop on Monday about the drugs gangs, the Albanian drugs gangs that are controlling, effectively, this trade across the Channel. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, we know that 12,000 Albanians have come across the English Channel so far this year, and that number is continuing to rise.
No war in Albania?
There isn't. It's a safe country, and in that sense, there may be some issues that people have individually there. That will be determined in the fullness of time. But what we're being told by official sources is that significant numbers of people have come across the English channel arranged to do so by Albanian criminal gangs to take part in their criminal enterprises, cannabis farms and the like. Now, this was brought home starkly to me just a month or so ago when I was filming with Suffolk Constabulary about an elite unit they have, Andrew, that stops drug crime and criminals using their road networks to transfer their drugs and their money, etc. And in their main operations room, they have what is effectively a rogues gallery. Now, this is posters, if you like, that are on the wall there. You can see them there for our radio listeners. It's 9 photographs there of people who have been processed, convicted and jailed. Of those 9 people, 7 are Albanian. And the officers told me this is what they're seeing day in, day out. Albanians, the absolute predominant force in the drugs trade in that one county. And we've been told it's similar situation in counties right across the country.
All the more reason why Suella Braverman has to get to grips with this.
Well, that's certainly her priority, but it is a very complex problem, there's no doubt.
All right, that's Mark White, who's our Home and Security Editor. Now, coming up, we've got the latest on where the trade unions are at with National Rail as they prepare for yet another week of strikes, with the two sides arguing over jobs, pay and conditions. I'll be speaking with a Tory MP who's a member of the Transport Select Committee about this. But first, it's your news update with Rhiannon.
Andrew, thank you. It's 12:34, your top stories from the GB newsroom. As we've been hearing, Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600 people. At one point, the facility held as many as 4,000, when it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. The Home Office says it's looking at what more can be done on capacity at the facility. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there'll be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. Twitter employees have been told they'll receive an email by 4 this afternoon telling them whether or not they've lost their job as part of a major shake-up. Offices have been temporarily closed and the access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as the new boss Elon Musk works out a way to find around £1 billion in annual savings. Unite says Qatar Airways will be one of the airlines affected by hundreds of workers striking at Heathrow Airport in the run-up to the World Cup finals. The airline had extra flights scheduled during the tournament. The union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew will be back in just a moment.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Now, Rishi Sunak is not only the United Kingdom's first Prime Minister of Indian heritage, but he's also the first Prime Minister of the Hindu faith. Back in 2015, when Sunak was first elected as an MP up in Richmond in Yorkshire, he swore his oath of allegiance on the, I hope I pronounce it correctly, on the Bhagavad Gita in place of the Bible, one of Hinduism's most sacred texts. Now, despite being widely acknowledged as a religion of peace, as enforced through Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent philosophy, there's ongoing debate as to the actual passiveness of the Hindu religion, with references to war in texts. So pacifist or not, will, and if so, how will Prime Minister Sunak's Hinduism impact on his leadership? Well, joining me now is Niyaz Kazi, Director of the Conservative Friends of India. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Andrew. Thank you for inviting me.
Whatever we think about it, it's got to be a great symbol of how far we've advanced in terms of race relations and inclusivity. The first Hindu Prime Minister in the UK.
Absolutely, it's a moment, and it's to be cherished and to be celebrated. And it's a beacon. It shows what modern Britain is all about, and how we celebrate diversity. And Britain it's a land of opportunity based on meritocracy.
Now, we often see the Prime Minister wearing a red wristband. That denotes his Hinduism.
Indeed, it's a religious artifact which is worn, and it defines his belief. Rishi is a member of the Hindu faith, and he believes in it, practicing Hindu, and it's very important to him. And Hinduism is a way of life. It is said by many as the world's oldest religion, and it's the third largest religion in the world. And it is a way of life. It is it's based upon its tenets are to hard work, working with society and to serve society. And dharma is the word which is used, and that is defined as ethical duty. And that's the substance of the faith. It is of service to mankind.
And he's a practicing Hindu. He goes to temple and he's proud to talk about it. What difference do you think it will make to people living in this country, Hindus, in your view, Niyaz, having a Hindu in Downing Street for the first time?
Everybody's very proud, and it was all more so, and it couldn't have been scripted when he was nominated on Diwali. You know, it was something to be celebrated, and all ethnic minorities, I think, are celebrating. The Hindu community are celebrating even more, and it's a moment to be cherished and proud of, because it was, when the families had come over to Britain, the Commonwealth families in the 50s and the 60s, this was something which couldn't have been imagined. And so to see this happen, it's more than a dream come true.
Some people would say, because perhaps they've not read detail about Hinduism, well, that must mean he's a pacifist because he's a Hindu. But that would be not to interpret your faith correctly.
No, the Hindu faith is based on, there is pacifism there, but then at the same time, as you mentioned, that in the scriptures, and in the Holy Scriptures, if, for example, there's a just cause and it requires, the cause requires more than pacifism, which was as put forward by Mahatma Gandhi, then that would, it is something which should be heeded to.
Now, you must have met Rishi Sunak. I'm sure you have. What's he like?
What you see is what you get. He's a great fellow, great ambassador. He's supported the work of Conservative Friends of India, as well as the other community groups which are there in the Conservative Party. And he always puts himself forward to serve the work we're doing. He's attended in the past many organizations to help promote members from ethnic minorities to get involved in politics, to consider standing as councillors. And he's provided training and his experiences as to what should be done. So he's always there to serve. And as I said, what you see is what you get. We are very proud of him, and he's demonstrated his skill and ability as well over COVID. What he has done in saving jobs for Britain as well as businesses.
Are you hoping that having a British Asian in Downing Street for the first time, Nayaz, that it will encourage more people from your community to go into public life, to go into politics, because we surely want to see a House of Commons that looks more like the country that the politicians are meant to be representing?
Absolutely, this is a pinnacle moment, and it's one which to take inspiration from, one which we can celebrate what modern Britain is about. But definitely, as you say, if you look at the makeup of the House of Commons today and even say 25, 30 years ago, it is very different. And high offices of state have been held by a number of members over the decade, from Priti Patel as Home Secretary and moving forward from there, holding high office. And this demonstrates that opportunities are there for those who strive. And the Conservative Party and the work we do at Conservative Friends of India is about developing that greater link.
If I can ask you just finally, are you tempted to throw your hat in the ring yourself, Nayaz, and run for Parliament?
I wouldn't say no to that.
So you're thinking you might?
Yes, indeed.
All right.
What we've been doing as Conservative Friends of India, we've been working with the community around the community to get everybody involved. But likewise, thank you for the suggestion.
All right, that's Nayaz Qazi. He's director of the Conservative Friends of India. And yes, I'm afraid it's happening all over again. More chaos for commuters. A fresh wave of strikes is to begin this weekend. It's going to impact Bonfire Night, for instance, and nearly all of next week. 3 unions joining together to take industrial action on Saturday, Monday and Wednesday. And just for good measure, the London Underground is walking out on Thursday. As well as disruption on strike days, services could also be impacted before and after due to the knock-on effects, which is exactly why they do it. Once again, people are being urged to plan ahead and only travel if necessary. Now, this increasingly bitter dispute is centred on pay, jobs and conditions. I'm joined now by Greg Smith. He's a member of the Transport Select Committee. Greg, thanks for joining us. More pain for train customers. When is this government finally going to deliver the legislation which will ensure a minimum level of service has to be provided on the trains when these unions go on strike?
Afternoon, Andrew. That is a really important question. It's something that I'm pushing within the Select Committee and as a backbench member of Parliament, the government to get on and do, because this industrial action has just gone on too long this year already. It has had a devastating effect on people's businesses, on their ability to get to medical appointments. There's lots of children in my constituency who actually go to some of the great Buckinghamshire grammar schools by train every morning. It's stopped children getting to school. This action cannot go on anymore, and I think the government needs to reprioritise to ensure that the legislation for the minimum service standards comes through Parliament before Christmas. It's ready to go, so there's no reason why we can't get on and do it. We shut down everybody's freedoms in a day at the start of the pandemic, so I think this has the level of urgency needed to be put through under very, very rapid timescales.
A majority in the Commons. The Tories have got a huge majority still. So can you explain why it's taking so long?
I wish I could give you the reason that it isn't happening overnight. It's certainly something that, as I said, I'm raising through the Select Committee. We had Mick Lynch in front of us a couple of weeks ago, and directly with transport ministers. And funnily enough, the former chairman of the Transport Select Committee, Hugh Merriman, has just been made the rail minister. I know he gets the urgency behind this because he chaired the session we had with unions just a couple of weeks ago. I don't know what the delay is, but we can't afford as a country, our children can't afford in terms of their education, people cannot afford in terms of the delays to getting to their medical appointments, this to go on any longer. And if you think about it rationally, all the unions are now doing is driving people away from the railways, getting people back in their cars or taking other modes of transport or working from home, and that's just going to undermine the entire future of the railways. By driving people away in their droves, there may not be railways to go back to.
Driver-only trains at some point, I'm sure that's going to be talked about, Greg, but I'm just looking at these figures suggesting that so far the rail strikes this summer has cost the economy £600 million. People can't get to work, it affects shops, pubs, hotels. That's a big, big blow to an economy that's already teetering on the precipice.
Absolutely, and that's what makes these strikes so unacceptable. Of course everybody wants a pay rise. Of course everybody wants more money in their back pockets. But if you go out and you engage in activity that hammers the economy, and I'd say the 600 million figure is quite a conservative estimate because there's lots of the economic damage that won't necessarily get picked up by those surveys. If you're inflicting that level of damage on an already very fragile economy, then that is just going to undermine people's ability to buy the railway tickets of the future, to even want to buy the railway tickets of the future, which will ultimately undermine people's job prospects on the railways in the long term. It is essentially a horrible act of self-harm as well as national harm.
And just to add to this sense of chaos, those people in Just Stop Oil, the pain that is Just Stop Oil, they've set a deadline, Greg, for their demands by the end of the day, or they say they're going to escalate their disruption. Do you think the police are being proactive enough in stopping these people disrupting our lives, causing problems with traffic? We know that ambulances have had to be turned back, fire engines have had to be turned back. Should the police really get tough now?
Yeah, we've passed the legislation to really crack down on unacceptable protests that disrupts people's lives and risks lives in the way that they have stopped ambulances and fire appliances from getting through their protests. And yeah, I absolutely agree that it is time for the police to use every last clause in each bit of legislation we've passed to crack down on unacceptable protest and ensure that those that think they can go about massively disrupting the economy of this country, people's day-to-day business, their ability to get to hospital in an emergency situation. The police need to use every bit of the powers we've given them to crack down on these protesters and ensure they're not able to do it and get away with their stunts and their tricks anymore.
I just ask you finally, you probably caught up on that story a week or so ago in Germany when these Stop Oil protesters raided a Volkswagen showroom. They were locked in, the heating was turned off, and they had absolutely no sanitation facility. So that pretty quickly turned into a dirty protest. And of course the hypocrites complained the heating was turned off and they were too cold. You'd have thought Stop Oil protesters would always want the heating turned off. Perhaps we should consider a reception like that for the Stop Oil protesters in this country, Greg.
I think we've got to obey the law, and we've passed lots of new legislation in recent months to ensure that the police have the powers to tackle protests. They need to use it, and they need to be tough in using it, because the British people have frankly had enough with these unacceptable levels of disruptive protests that just destroy people's day-to-day lives and in sometimes, as I said earlier, risk people's lives.
It's Greg Smith, the Conservative MP, who's a member of the Commons Transport Select Committee. They drive me insane, those Stop Oil protesters, and if I saw them, I personally would drag them off the street. Now, coming up, the King. It's still strange to hear that expression, isn't it? The King, Charles III, is shortly going to host a reception at Buckingham Palace. That's for business figures and national government organisations ahead of the UN Climate Change Summit in COP27. More than 200 guests from across the globe are expected to attend, including the Prime Minister, after his first of many U-turns, I suspect, this time on attending the summit, which is being held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Let's talk now to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who's at Buckingham Palace as the dignitaries arrive. Cameron.
Well, Andrew, they're arriving now, and there's somewhat of a traffic jam here at the Victoria Memorial as the guests line up to be admitted into Buckingham Palace. There's lots of horns going off, so perhaps not the smoothest start to this reception here at Buckingham Palace, looking ahead to the COP27 summit in Egypt. Now, the King, as Prince of Wales, as we know, for the last 50 years or so, has really kind of championed action on a sustainable future. And if you remember back in Glasgow last year at COP26, he used his speech to say we needed to be on what he described as a warlike footing to tackle the climate crisis. Now, from my understanding, when he was Prince of Wales, he was planning to perhaps attend COP27 in Egypt, but following the death of his mother, the Queen, and now the fact that he's king, I understand that it was a unanimous agreement between number 10 Downing Street and Buckingham Palace when Liz Truss was in power that he would not be attending this particular conference in Egypt. But the King's focus is very much, as Buckingham Palace describes it, on this reception here at Buckingham Palace behind me this afternoon. He's hosting business leaders, politicians, non-profit organisations, people from across the globe. Over 200 people are expected to attend. You might still hear the horns behind me of people queuing to get in, kind of exploring ways that the public sector and the private sector can work together to tackle the climate crisis. And this is something that the King's, which he launched when he was Prince of Wales, his Sustainable Markets Initiative back in 2020, which was looking at how private sector organisations and public sector could collaborate to tackle climate change and work towards a sustainable future. Now, we know that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, reversed his decision to skip the COP27 summit in Egypt. He now very much is attending, and a Downing Street spokesperson yesterday said that she alluded to the fact that if Rishi Sunak was in power earlier, then the King might have been able to attend the summit in Egypt. But yesterday it was kind of said that it would be logistically impossible really now at this late stage for His Majesty the King to attend the summit in Egypt, even if he wanted to. But the King is very much, as I said, Buckingham Palace is very much insisting that the King is very much focused on this reception here behind me, and it was a unanimous agreement between government and the palace that he would not be flying to Egypt for his first overseas tour as sovereign. Now, the COP26 President Alok Sharma is expected to be here this afternoon. He will be handing over his presidency in Egypt, and the Prime Minister is expected to make a speech this afternoon. So as soon as we have any more details of what he says in the speech or anything else that's happening behind Buckingham Palace walls, we'll bring it straight to you.
Can I just ask you as well, Cameron, we know that the King and the Queen Consort are living at Clarence House. And they're going to continue to live there for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of building work going on at Buckingham Palace, but it's quite clear from that reception today, there was a reception a couple of days ago too, that Buckingham Palace as the firm is still very much going to be the centre of the monarchy, the public face of the monarchy, if you like.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Andrew. It is very much the centre of the monarchy here at Buckingham Palace. It's very much the office, as perhaps I would describe it, whereas Clarence House is still very much the home. As you alluded to there, Buckingham Palace is in the middle of a 10-year refurbishment programme. It's due to be completed in 2027. There are parts of the building which still have scaffolding in places, but the staterooms and the areas which can host a number of members of the public and guests very much are operational, as we have seen from various receptions and various audiences that both the Prime Minister and the Queen Consort have hosted here at Buckingham Palace since they kind of acceded to the throne. But perhaps it is thought that by 2027 Buckingham Palace will be completed and the King and Queen Consorts will move more permanently into Buckingham Palace. But if you remember back in 1952, when the Queen came to the throne, she was living at Clarence House, and it took a little bit of time before she actually moved into Buckingham Palace. But it was understood then that she very much preferred Clarence House, and it wouldn't surprise me, due to the fact that the King and the Queen Consorts have lived at Clarence House for such a long time, but they still see that very much as their home and Buckingham Palace as the office.
All right, that's Cameron Walker, who's at Buckingham Palace, and we'll bring you the latest on that as and when it happens later on today. You're watching Andrew Pierce. It's my new show. I'm here with you until 3 o'clock. Plenty more still to come in the next hour. And from 2 p.m, I'm delighted to say I'm going to be joined by the legendary lyricist, Sir Tim Rice. He's got a fabulous new musical in London's West End. So don't miss that. But now it's time for the weather.
Alex Deegan here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Cracking day out there if you like fine, bright weather through the autumn months. Lighter winds than we've been used to as well, thanks to a little ridge of high pressure. Don't get too used to it. Big area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. That deep low is staying away, but it is throwing these weather fronts towards us for tomorrow. Ahead of that, though, as I said, most places having a fine day. There are a few showers, which will keep going across parts of Cumbria, west coast of Scotland, across the far north of Scotland too, even one or two across Wales and southwest England this morning, but they're few and far between, and they'll fizzle out this afternoon. So many central and eastern areas certainly staying dry with sunny spells. And in that sunshine, temperatures getting close to average. Bit of a chill in the air first thing this morning, but feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. It is cooler than it has been, but it is going to turn milder as we go through the weekend into next week. Certainly not that mild if heading out this evening, however. For most, it's going to be dry and clear, and under those clear spells, it will turn quite chilly. But here comes the rain into Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England by dawn. As the rain moves in, temperatures will start to pick up again, but certainly across many eastern areas it will be a chilly start to Saturday. Could be some pockets of frost across northeast England and eastern Scotland. Maybe a bright start in the east if you're up early enough, but it won't last. The cloud will move in, bringing outbreaks of rain for many. Northern Ireland cheers up pretty smartly, and much of Scotland will actually have a brighter afternoon, and eventually West Wales may see some sunny spells, but elsewhere staying fairly dull. It will be a little milder than today, but it won't feel all that mild with the cloud, the increasing breeze. Now, we probably won't see much rain across East Anglia and the southeast till late on. But once it's arrived, it may well linger into the evening, so bear that in mind for Saturday evening, particularly if you've got plans to go to a firework display. Could be a bit of a soggy one across the southeast. Elsewhere, we'll see some showers, and that's how we go into Sunday. There'll be some sunny spells, but there will continue to be some pretty heavy showers around too.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio,
And online,
We're proud to be
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, welcome back to my brand new show, aptly named Andrew Pierce. I'm right with you until 3 p.m. and coming up on the show today, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She's done it again, she's hit the headlines. And no, I'm afraid she hasn't sorted the UK migrant crisis, yet, far from it. This time, she's visited the dubbed overcrowded and unsanitary Manston migrant facility in Kent by, wait for it, a military helicopter. Was that the best decision? In Northern Ireland, it's been decided there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas, but Sinn Féin aren't impressed, describing the delay as classic Tory chaos. We're going to hear that charge a lot more, I suspect, with this government. Plus, we're going to have another People's Poll, hearing what UK politics means to you. Have you got faith in Rishi Sunak as he puts our taxes up yet again? Or are you steering towards Sir Keir Starmer? That's the Labour leader. All that and much more, so stay with me. And remember, I want to hear your views, so email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk and let us know if you've been impacted by anything we've discussed today. We'll try to get lots of your views on air with me during the next 3 hours. Lots more coming up too, but first, the latest headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 minute past 1. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600 people. At one point, as many as 4,000 were being held at the facility in Kent, when it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. Number 10 says the Home Office is looking at what more can be done about capacity at the processing centre. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there'll be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February. Scotland's First Minister says she regrets delays in the delivery of 2 ferries, which are both late and over budget. The vessels are due to be delivered next year and early in 2024 at a potential cost of more than £300 million. That's 3 times the initial contract. Nicola Sturgeon's given evidence before a committee of MSPs investigating their construction after Audit Scotland said there have been a multitude of failings.
Obviously, this is still a live project, regrettably so, and the Scottish Government remains absolutely committed to delivering both ferries and supporting our island communities that rely so heavily on vessels of this type on a daily basis.
2 people have been charged following disorder in Dundee on Halloween night. Emergency services, including riot police, responded to calls after bonfires and fireworks were lit on streets in the Kirkton area. A 28-year-old woman and 15-year-old boy have been charged with alleged mobbing and rioting offences. They're expected to appear in court later today. Strike action by hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport could affect football fans heading to the World Cup in Qatar. Unite Union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. They include ground handling and cargo staff. The World Cup kicks off in just over 2 weeks, and the union says it expects Qatar Airways to be hit heavily by the strike action. The airline has put on an extra flights for football fans. Twitter has started its mass sackings as it continues its major restructuring under new owner Elon Musk. Reports suggest as many as half of the firm's global workforce could be laid off as part of the cost-cutting measures. Employees have been told they'll receive an email by 4 this afternoon telling them whether or not they've lost their job. Offices have been temporarily closed and access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as Elon Musk works to find £1 billion in annual savings. Donald Trump has dropped one of his strongest hints yet that he may run for the White House again.
In order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay? Very, very, very probably.
Speaking to a crowd in Iowa, the former US president teased a strong possibility of a comeback. It's the first of 4 rallies in 5 days for the Republican as he campaigns for candidates in next week's midterm elections. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden will be rallying with former President Barack Obama on Saturday in Pennsylvania. A man who had COVID for 411 days has finally tested negative. The 59-year-old's thought to have had the virus longer than anyone else in the world. Doctors say he's finally clear of the early variant of COVID thanks to a cocktail of drugs. The man has a weakened immune system as a result of a kidney transplant and first tested positive back in December 2020. And the King is hosting a reception at Buckingham Palace this afternoon for business figures and NGOs ahead of COP27 in Egypt. More than 200 guests from across the globe are attending. The Prime Minister will be among them after his U-turn on attending the UN Climate Change Summit next week. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew Pearce.
Hello, welcome to my brand new show. I'm going to be with you every Friday lunchtime, and I want to hear your views, so why don't you email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll try to get some of you on. But first, our stop story this afternoon. Following the Bank of England's decision to raise interest rates yesterday, new tax rises are also expected to fix the government's fiscal black hole. The pressure is definitely on for the Prime Minister and Chancellor, who are preparing their autumn budget, taking place in just under 2 weeks. They're rumoured to be reviewing major infrastructure projects, including a high-speed rail line in northern England. However, in the last hour, Downing Street has said the construction of the Sizewell C nuclear plant, which had seemed to be in doubt, is not one of those projects being reviewed or delayed. Well, let's cross over to Downing Street and talk to GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, I'm a big fan, but she's under huge pressure. She visited the Dover and Manson Processing Centre yesterday after the threat of legal action from charities over the conditions at the site. It's meant to hold 1,600 people for a matter of days. However, it's been used up to 3,500 people for several weeks. And Downing Street has been forced to defend her after she used a military helicopter to go to Kent while she dodged questions from the press. I don't see what the problem is, Tom. Do you?
Well, some people say that this was excess, that this was spending too much money getting from one place to another in the midst of a cost of living crisis. However, of course, these are secure facilities, and there are people who do travel between them using military means. We know that the military has been involved with some of the elements in the channel. Of course, the Navy had been policing for a time elements of the channel as well. So perhaps it's not that unusual that you'd expect a Home Secretary on a visit like this to use that sort of equipment. However, there has been the criticism that this is a bad look, that this cost too much money at a time when, of course, it's only a week and a half away from this fiscal statement, this autumn statement, which will be asking a lot more people to surrender a lot more of their hard-earned cash to the government, and indeed will see spending reductions as well. So perhaps in the context of that, the look of it wasn't the wisest. However, it is interesting looking at what is going on in Manston. The government is saying more people are being moved on from that site, although an interesting exchange that was had in our lobby briefing today with the Prime Minister's official spokesman was about this issue of individuals moving on from these centres on the coast and ending up sort of wandering around central London, sort of not having a place to go. There were some people that were sort of found dumped by Victoria Station earlier in the week, and big questions as to what the process is behind that. It seems that there is a process at these centres whereby if a migrant, if an asylum seeker says they have somewhere to go, they will be assessed by that centre and told they can go. Now, there's confusion as to whether or not the Home Office then contacts the place they say they're going to in order to check the legitimacy of that. It does seem on the face of it that what we have been told is that the asylum seekers themselves are the people who are assessed, and if they say they have somewhere to go, in many instances they're let to go there.
Tom, of course, the cost issue about this helicopter is a red herring, isn't it? Because it's a Ministry of Defence helicopter used all the time by VIPs, by government figures, even members of the royal family. So there was no actual net cost to anybody.
Well, that's certainly true. The helicopter is, of course, owned by the government. The only marginal cost would be fuel. So whether or not that does play into the things in the round, or indeed if this helicopter was to be used on the routine exercises we see in that area, in any case, is still an open question. But yes, it is frankly not accurate for, as some journalists have seemed to be doing, pointing to the cost of chartering a private helicopter and saying how much that costs versus a train ticket. The two are not comparable because, of course, as you rightly say, this is a helicopter that is owned by the British state.
Tom, they're firefighting on all fronts, aren't they? The headlines today are pretty grisly for the government, aren't they? The Times says bank rates rise to head off spiralling inflation. The Telegraph, Hunt, that's the Chancellor, set to launch capital gains rate. A raft of new tax rises coming in. Very, very difficult for a Conservative government that's already put the tax burden to its highest level for 70 years.
Yes, it is remarkable. We think back to that mini-budget that happened at the end of September. That was supposed to start the process of bringing down the historically high tax burden. Of course, you're right, highest in 70 years it was projected to get to. The mini-budget would have turned that back to being simply taking the tax burden to where it was a few years ago. 2019 was the level it would have returned it to. But of course, that was all scuppered, abandoned, ditched, apart from one element, the national insurance tax rise. That was reversed, that remains, and yet all the other tax cuts, of course, in that budget have now gone, and far from seeing further tax cuts, we are going to see a net increase in the level of taxation. Perhaps most perniciously, the rumours are of a further stealth tax affecting everyone in the country, whereby thresholds are held on ordinary tax levels. And that would mean that people who are not used to paying the higher rates would be dragged into those higher rates. People that aren't used to be paying the basic rate would be dragged into the basic rate as well. This is the pernicious nature of inflation, dragging everyone into a higher tax rate. And unless those bands are raised with the level of inflation, more people will be paying more tax without even a headline rate being raised. It's called a stealth tax, and it's something that we're expecting to take place in this autumn statement as well. That on top of many other measures that may well be very damaging to businesses, measures around dividends, around capital gains, all of these things that might not be the most flashy commercial things to say it's good that we have low taxes here, but when it comes to attracting inward investment, when it comes to attracting entrepreneurialism and growth, the things that we really do need as we enter what the Bank of England now forecasts to be the longest recession on record. Not particularly deep, shallow, but long. And that is what I suppose many people would describe as stagnation. And especially given the inflationary environment we're in right now, how very similar does it seem to the late 1970s? Stagflation was the term then, when yes, unemployment was low, but inflation was high and growth was non-existent. That may well be a similar plane to where we're operating in right now. It's a deep, deep worry.
All right, that's Tom Harwood, who's GB News political correspondent from Downing Street, and that, if they do freeze allowances, that's just a kick in your aspirations. Now, joining me in the studio, I'm delighted to say GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, I know you want to deal with that line, which Tom raised, which is still being propagated, that these migrants were just dumped outside Victoria Coach Station. That isn't the case.
Yeah, the Home Office is hitting back fairly strongly on this. They say that that was never the case. They did not dump these individuals there. They took them at their request to that part of central London because, according to the Home Office, these people told them that they had other accommodation with friends and family, which under the processing protocols is allowed. You're either put into interim accommodation arranged by the Home Office in hotels, or if you have friends and family, they can bail you to then stay with them. They had been told, apparently, by these individuals that they had that arrangement, then were deposited at Victoria Station. Most did, it seems, have friends and family they could go and stay with, but 11 individuals didn't. Once it was realised that what they had told the Home Office was wrong, that they didn't have anywhere to go, the Home Office then made urgent arrangements to get them
into hotel accommodation in Norwich.
And on the helicopter, which again I think is another red herring, people are saying, oh, she's talked about an invasion, so she's using a military helicopter to reinforce that image. But actually, it didn't cost anything in the sense it was a Ministry of Defence helicopter, which is there every day to be used. But also, even if they had hired a helicopter, which I think would be about £4,000 an hour, that's a drop in the ocean compared to what the taxpayer is paying to put refugees, many of whom I think are economic migrants, by the way, not asylum seekers, in hotels up and down the length of the country.
Yeah, I mean, of all the issues to get angry about, when it's costing £6.8 million and rising every single day to house people in the interim accommodation of hotels up and down the country, the requisitioning of hundreds of hotels, taking them out of use for people that would want to use them for the purpose that they are intended to be used for. The fact of this helicopter is that the military is in command and control of these operations in the Channel to deal with the small boat crisis. Day in, day out, they're there. They use military helicopters in that operation. Now, the Home Secretary, I'm told, wasn't just using the helicopter to transfer from Dover to Manston. That might have been an indulgence, but it was instead an operation to get her over the Channel to see where the boats are coming from, to see where the facilities are and how they respond and the choke points and all of the above. And it wasn't just her, there were other people in the helicopter. They couldn't charter a small civilian helicopter. A military helicopter, which is there to be used by the military, was the obvious choice, they would say. And it's hard to argue with that.
And the military are running the operation now.
Yeah, completely. They are in command and control, and she was seeing the command and control structures that they have in place and was being told by those military officers, along with the Border Force personnel, about how this operation works, where they need to go to get them across the Channel. So you get a much better vantage point from the air. You can see the enormity of the task that they face.
All right, that's Mark White, who's our Home and Security Editor. Thanks for joining me. Now, Northern Ireland. There's to be no Stormont Assembly elections before Christmas. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed. Chris Heaton-Harris, he is the Northern Ireland Secretary, he's going to outline the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin, quick to describe the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. And I'm telling you, that's a charge we're going to hear again and again about this government. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February, and the DUP is currently boycotting the formation of the ruling executive in protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is another problem in Rishi Sunak's in-tray. With me in the studio, of course, is the former First Minister of Northern Ireland and GB News presenter, Dame Arlene Foster. Shall I call you Dame Arlene?
Just call me Arlene.
Arlene. Arlene, are you surprised where we are now, the election not going to happen by Christmas?
No, I'm not. And I was sitting here last week with Alistair Stewart talking about the election and the fact that it was going to be called. And we had been told on the run-up to last Friday by the Secretary of State Northern Ireland that he was definitely going to call an election. It was definitely going to happen and all of this. Of course, it hasn't happened. And I'm not entirely surprised because, frankly, an election was not going to solve anything. It would just probably bring more or less the same parties back in the same strength that they are now, albeit there may have been changes around the edges. So what really needs to be done is to deal with the fundamental problem that's causing all of this, which, of course, is the protocol. And we've been told now for nearly 2 years that this is going to be dealt with by our own government, and it hasn't been. It's, as you know, there's a Northern Ireland Protocol Bill in the House of Lords, actually, at the moment, and it's been frustrated there by some of the Lords. But the Secretary of State is saying that if the European Union doesn't come forward in negotiations and try to solve this issue, that they're going to go ahead with the legislation, but it's taking an awfully long time.
And what does it effectively mean? The Northern Ireland Protocol, Northern Ireland remains in the single European market. Effectively, Northern Ireland's being treated as effective as if it's still in the European Union.
So when people talk about Brexit being done, Andrew, it's not done for Northern Ireland. We're still within the single market for goods. People tried to explain that that was the best of both worlds. know that we were in the United Kingdom, but we were also in the single market for goods. But of course, what happens is there's a border effectively now between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There are checks that happen on goods that move within the internal market of the United Kingdom, which of course for unionists is completely unacceptable, because what you're doing is splitting up the sovereignty of the UK.
And is it right that the checks that are being imposed by the European Union around the Northern Ireland border are far more onerous, far more checks than in other parts of the European Union, in a sense as if we're being punished for Brexit?
Well, and that has always been the belief, that the Northern Ireland Protocol is basically our medicine for having the temerity to leave the European Union. So the disproportionality of the amount of checks that happen between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is incredible. When you look at the risk, the whole idea behind the Northern Ireland Protocol is to secure the single market of the European Union. In other words, not allow goods into the single market that are shoddy or below standard. There is no risk. There is no risk to the single European market from goods moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, because, of course, Northern Ireland is a sterling zone, like the rest of the United Kingdom. The Republic of Ireland is a Eurozone, so immediately you would see goods that are marked up in sterling. If they were in the European Union, you would notice that, one would have thought.
Yeah.
And of course, there were ways to deal with this. There were technology solutions, there were alternative arrangements, trusted traders, small business exemptions, but they were all pushed out of the way by the European Union, and this is a political decision, and that's why it has to be a political negotiation that sorts this out.
Just finally, because we're under pressure of time, Arlene, do you sense any progress, any positive steps that this could be resolved? Because you say it's 2 years now. People in Northern Ireland are being treated differently to the rest of the United Kingdom.
Sure.
Is there anything in the air?
Well, because of the way in which government has been vacillating over the summer, and indeed up until now, there hasn't been a focus on dealing with the Northern Ireland Protocol. We had hoped once Rishi Sunak had come in that there would be more of a focus, but as you've said in your previous interview with Mark, there's a lot of other things on the agenda in terms of migrants, in terms of the economy, the bigger picture there. But for us in Northern Ireland, we simply feel it's a citizen issue. If we are citizens of the United Kingdom, then we should be able to access the same goods as the rest of people in the UK. And at the moment, our goods are more expensive and we've less choice, and that's all down to the Northern Ireland Protocol.
All right, that's Arlene Foster. Of course, she is a GB News presenter here. She is also a former member of the DUP, and I haven't congratulated you because you're about to become Baroness Foster. Where's your title? Baroness Foster of where?
Well, it hasn't been announced yet, but I'm sure it'll be on GB News very soon.
All the best news breaks here. Now, coming up, after weeks of will he, won't he, Prime Minister Sunak has decided he is going, after all, to that COP27 climate summit in Egypt. I wish he'd just done it on Zoom. We'll hear from the Vice President of Siemens Energy on what the future could look like for UK energy. But first, a quick break.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back. Rishi Sunak has confirmed, after all, he will be going to that COP27 summit in Egypt. It kicks off on Sunday. The Prime Minister is travelling to Sharm el-Sheikh to hand over the COP presidency to Egypt after, of course, the UK hosted COP26 in Glasgow last November. He says, "I'm attending COP27 to deliver on Glasgow's legacy of building a secure, clean and sustainable future." Now, the energy giant Siemens UK has been at the heart of efforts to develop renewable power sources, including wind and solar, helping to cut carbon emissions. Renewables now account for up to 40% of Britain's electricity. So ahead of Sunday's COP27 opening, GB News economics and business editor, my very old friend Liam Halligan, he met the Vice President of Siemens UK, Steve Scrimshaw.
I get it that that we need to keep the lights on. We need to make sure people have affordable electricity, etc. Net zero actually will deliver us a sustainable, secure energy independence at an affordable price in the future. And I think it's a bit like we have to, fix the roof a little bit when it's raining, but also plan for the future as well. So the commitments that the government have made with the commitment to having net zero by 2035, I think that will also help us in the future to make sure that we've got affordable energy. For example, if we didn't have the gas price now, the offshore wind business is delivering competitive electricity prices. So this is in effect future-proofing the energy system so that we are not reliant on this global market in the future so much.
Tell us about the progress we've made. Not so long ago, 40% of our electricity was generated using coal. Now it's almost none. Renewables are a major part of our energy mix. Gas, though, is still 35 to 40%. To what extent are renewables already helping us?
Renewables are helping us significantly. I mean, if you look, we've got, 12, 14 gigawatts of renewables in the sea at the moment.
What does that mean to my mum?
To your mum, it means we've got lots of offshore wind farms that are out in the sea. She probably can't see them, being connected up to the national grid.
But there are days when renewables are 20, 30, even 40% of our energy mix, right?
They are indeed. And you'll hear things talked about like hydrogen, and you'll hear things talked about energy storage. So when you have wind, we have days when there's lots of wind, but we don't have the demand for energy. That's when we need to start thinking about energy storage. And some of the things that we want to talk about is to get the industry to start talking about policies around energy storage, long duration energy storage. So when the sun don't shine, when the wind ain't blowing, you've actually captured wind energy when you didn't need it. And then you can use that stored energy to provide cheap electricity to homes and businesses across the country. So please keep your focus on the net zero agenda, because there's those things that you have to do. Give you another little stat on if you talk about wind turbines, right? So we have to quadruple the number of wind turbines that we have to put in the sea compared to what we've done to date. And we've got half the time to do it.
Before the government's target?
Before the government's target of hitting 50 gigawatts by 2030. And if you look at what does that mean, if you think 25% of the global manufacturing capacity will be needed to deliver that for the UK alone, right? So they're big numbers.
Now, you're proudly from the Northeast. I've been up to the Northeast a lot pursuing this sort of energy story. I know Siemens Energy UK is involved in the big carbon capture project up there on Teesside. I know you've got a wind turbine manufacturing facility. I think it's in Hull.
Correct, yeah.
How big could offshore wind be for the UK? Somebody called Boris Johnson, I can't remember who he is myself, but he once said that we could be the Saudi Arabia of wind, referring to, obviously, the desert kingdom that has dominated global oil production in recent generations. Is he right?
I think he is right. We've got some unique geology in the UK. You know, we've got best winds anywhere. Wind turbines make sense offshore. They're getting further offshore. We talk about things like floating wind as well. And then we also have geology like empty
floating
gas.
wind where the sea's too deep to bolt to or
so you
economically bolt to.
Absolutely, that sort of thing. We also have gas fields which are empty, so we can actually store carbon that's produced from industries and from power generation. We can store carbon. That's the project you're talking about on Teesside. There's another one.
Locking it underground.
Locking it underground, storing it for hundreds of years. And these are all things that actually take you to that net zero position. So if we can have, think ahead to 2030, if we deliver this, and the key is, can we deliver it? And the point I want to make is about capacity in the supply chain. There's things that we have to unlock and then grow the capacity, which will deliver low cost, sustainable energy for the future. And if that happens, then we've delivered our net zero by 2035.
That was Liam Halligan with Siemens UK head Steve Scrimshaw to say on COP27. We know the real reason Rishi Sunak's going. It's because the bombshell Boris Johnson's going too, and he didn't want to be upstage with him. Now, you're watching GB News with me, Andrew Pearce. Coming up, I'm going to be joined in the studio by GB News polling analyst David Cowling. The Tories are still trailing way behind in the polls, but are things on the up for Rishi Sunak? And a new study suggests more farmers are struggling with poor mental health, and some say it's down to the killings and treatment of animals. We'll be hearing from animal rights organisation PETA, but before that, here's your news update.
It's 1:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, the facility held as many as 4,000 people, when it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. The Home Office says it's looking at what more can be done on capacity at the facility. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. Twitter has started its mass sackings as it continues its major restructuring under new owner Elon Musk. Reports suggest as many as half of the firm's global workforce could be laid off as part of cost-cutting measures. Employees have been told they'll receive an email by 4 p.m. telling them whether or not they've lost their job. And Unite says Qatar Airways will be one of the airlines affected by hundreds of workers striking at Heathrow Airport in the run-up to the World Cup finals. The airline had extra flights scheduled during the tournament. The union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1291 and €1.1433. The price of gold is £1,476.25 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,324 points.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching Andrew Pierce on GB News. Well, it's been a chaotic few months for the government, let alone the country, and the Conservatives are still polling woefully low figures, with all polling suggesting if there were an election today or tomorrow, they'd be out of the office and out on their ear. Labour leader Keir Starmer would be the first Labour Prime Minister since Gordon Brown, who, of course, was forced out of left office in 2010. However, there do seem to be some signs of progression under Rishi Sunak, with the latest poll from Redfield and Wilton cutting Labour's lead down to 17 points, with Labour on 47 and the Conservatives 30%. Still a significant lead, but greatly down on some of those polls in October, which had Labour's lead in the high 30s. So is it a sign Sunak is enjoying some sort of bounce? Joining me now in the studio is GB News polling analyst David Cowling. David, it's a measure of where we are now with this government that the idea they're only 17 points behind is seen as rather good news.
You're absolutely right. And if you're drowning, any plank that's thrown to you or any shred of wood is to be grasped. I think the polls, more seriously, the polls are showing some recovery for the Conservatives, but once again, as you rightly say, it's a very deep hole they're in. Rishi Sunak coming in to replace the rather hapless Liz Truss, one would expect a bit of that.
Rather hapless is the understatement of the year.
Thank you. I'm in a charitable mood uncharacteristically today. But yes, so one would expect something to come back there. Also, when one reads below the headline figures of the voting intention, Sunak has recovered in several of the polls. He's now briefly a bit ahead of Starmer on the best PM. The Conservatives are recovering a bit on the question of the best to handle the economy. So they're becoming more competitive. But I suspect, Andrew, that the biggest problem they're going to face is that the Bank of England forecast of yesterday. So we now appear going to have the longest recession on record and 10% inflation that's going to take us through, it seems, until the summer of next year. Now, if Rishi Sunak can redeem that, if he can restore our fortunes, history may be very kind to him, but the voters who have to endure the medicine may not. So I think for him, these early signs are encouraging, and for the party, of course they are, and they may build on them. But we're still, as you rightly say, in some very deep and dire territory, and we've got some pretty heavy headwinds ahead of them.
Now, we know interest rates are going up around the world, whether it's from Arkansas to Aberdeen, but the difficulty the Prime Minister's going to have here is some voters will associate this rise in mortgage rates when the fixed-term mortgages end for people in the next months ahead. Some people could be facing thousands of pounds more in their mortgages. Are they going to blame the Conservatives for that because of the way Miss Liz Truss's mini-budget, unravelled in the eyes of the city? The city was spooked and forced up early interest rates.
I suspect that probably people will tend to blame the government. They have that tendency in the past. But also, if you see it as part of a cocktail of other problems, the previous segment where you had Tom talking, some of the things that are coming down the road, which the government has to do in order to restore fortunes, as they would say, aren't going to be popular. So if my mortgage is going up, and everything else is fine, I might be a bit sort of philosophical about it. But if my mortgage is going up, as well as high inflation, as well as high energy costs and the rest of it, it becomes a potentially quite toxic mix for the government to overcome. And I think the resentment for dint of anything else, will just the laser beam will concentrate on the government.
We shouldn't forget the NHS is another crisis all on its own. But when you look at those polls, we see the slight recovery for the Conservatives. We know the people who tend to vote Conservative are older people. They've often paid off their mortgage. They've got savings in the bank. Interest rates going up will actually help them because the deposits they're getting on their build inside your bank accounts will increase. But the trouble is they're talking about getting rid of the triple lock, which ensures actually that pensions go up in line with inflation. That will be politically, potentially, a catastrophic decision for a Conservative government that relies on the grey vote to get them into number 10.
Certainly sort of aiming your guns at your core supporters isn't necessarily the most successful political strategy. But again, perhaps it's a reflection of the world in which he finds himself, that he's now become Prime Minister. He was Chancellor, as we know, and he was Father Christmas for about 18 months.
Yes, he was.
And very popular.
The furlough scheme.
Absolutely, very, very popular.
Eat out to help out.
Absolutely, very popular things to do. But now Father Christmas is becoming Scrooge.
Yes.
And it's going to be interesting to see whether the public, in a sense, bites the bullet, bites its tongue and goes with him, realising that we're in a mess and these things need to be done, or whether they start building up a sense of resentment because they see no end to the individual dilemmas they face.
What about that other old age question for all governments, David? They've been in power for a very long time. It feels like they've been in power for a very long time. They're tired, they're running out of steam. It could be 14 years at the next election. Won't there be lots of people who just think, that's it, time for a change? Very difficult to counter that argument.
It is. I think John Major famously said that when they won 92, unexpectedly, the 92 election, he said he thought they'd stretched the democratic elastic too far. So it will be a very long time. However, I would only caution, in our lifetime, I'm 1,000 years older than you, but...
but you don't look it.
You're very kind. There were tribal voting.
Yeah.
Blocks of Conservatives, blocks were virtually immovable. Now, all of that is shattered. In the 2015, 2017, 2010, 2015, 2017 elections, 3 elections within 7 years of each other, 50% of the people who voted in all of those 3 elections did not vote for the same party in all of them. So the certainties of my youth have just disintegrated. The reason I say that is that I think for many members of the public, it's become much more transactional politics rather than tribal. And so it's not beyond the possibility of the Conservatives reforming themselves. They did famously with John Major. Everybody was talking about time's up, but somehow his election made people feel, and replacement of Thatcher, new government. So they'd had the election, hadn't they? Yeah. So that was the benefit. Now, I don't say that's anything like possible necessarily, but he has a historical precedent to look to. But nevertheless, what you say is I'm sure correct. There's truth in it, and it just becomes another element of the charge sheet that he's got to address.
And of course, if we go across the Atlantic, midterm elections in the United States, they're not looking particularly good for the Democrats. We've got the dithering president, Joe Biden, who sometimes you wonder if he remembers his own name.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump made a speech in the last 24 hours where he dropped the heaviest hint so far. He could be back. If the Democrats do very badly and the Republicans do very well, is the polling suggesting a return of Trump is a possibility? And could he really win the White House again?
Well, there are occasional polls in the States where, although he's not been in power for 20 months, they sometimes put him up against Biden. And it's pretty neck and neck, as most of those polls have gone. But I think, Andrew, it's less to do with the polling as far as Donald Trump is concerned and more to do with, in a sense, his own mindset. My guess is, in our family, the big test is, would you bet the mortgage on it? If I had to bet the mortgage on it, I think he will put his name forward. The difficulty he's going to face is that if the polling, after he announces, say that he's going to stand, if the polling shows that the Republicans are suffering, then I think keep your eyes open for Ron DeSantis, because he may well be the governor of Florida. He may well, and is currently second only to Trump in terms of whom Republicans want as the candidate. He might be able to come through the middle if Trump having announced it, shows that he can't actually get across the line and defeat, because he's almost certainly not going to be up against Joe Biden, that's for sure.
Fascinating. Donald Trump, the feast that just keeps giving. That's David Cowling, who is GB News' polling analyst. Now, thanks for joining us, David. Now, the last flight will touch down at Doncaster Sheffield Airport this evening. Its owner is pressed ahead with highly controversial plans to close it down. The Peel Group says it's shutting the airport, which employs about 800 people, due to a fundamental lack of financial viability. That's their expression, not mine. Local councillors have sought ways of keeping the airport open, but they failed to take off. Let's now speak to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley. Anna, this is very sad because this is an incredibly popular airport. I think in which surveys it's consistently way at the top of the league table.
It is. It's a very well-loved airport. It's South Yorkshire's only airport, and it brings in £110 million to the economy every year. It employs 800 staff members here, but if it was to close, it could impact up to 2,700 jobs. But the fight isn't over quite yet. Local leaders have been in discussions with Peel Group, who own the airport. They've said that they have found a buyer, so they're still in talks at the moment now as to whether Peel will accept that offer. So that's something that we can keep you updated with if it is accepted or not. But if the airport is to close, it is going to be a real blow for the area. I've been speaking to people today who have been campaigning themselves to try and keep the airport open, and this is what one local man who uses the airport had to say.
We have the airport, we have the road links, we have everything. If the government were truly committed to levelling up in the north, this would be your northern powerhouse, this would be your levelling up, this would be Gateway East, this would be everything to a lot of people around here. It's our local airport. We've just gained city status. On Wednesday next week, His Majesty the Queen and the Queen Consort are arriving to officially confirm that to Doncaster City, and we're losing our airport. It's sad, it's really sad, especially for the 2,800 people who are going to lose their job just before Christmas. You can't put that.
Kev Finnegan there just saying what a blow it'll be, and you know, is it levelling up if you're taking away airports like this from the north? Very concerned. So we'll keep you updated as to whether it does close, but it is scheduled to have the last flight landing here from Egypt this evening. But a real blow for the local economy if it is to happen.
Well, all right, that's Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley. In fact, that airport, you know, topped the Which survey of popularity not 1 year, but 4 years running. So they've got to find a way of keeping it going, surely. Now, a recent study by the Farm Safety Foundation found that 92% of UK farmers under the age of 40 cited poor mental health as the biggest problem they're facing. Animal rights group PETA believes that much of farmers' mental health is down to the daily business of animal farming, from separating calves from their mothers to sending animals off to slaughter, not to mention the recent outbreak of avian flu, which is resulting in many poultry farmers having to cull thousands of their bird stock. Well, joining me now is Jennifer White from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, more commonly known as PETA. Thanks for coming in, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Farmers, of course they're going to slaughter their animals because that's how they make their money. Surely the depression and mental health issues they may be facing is, like a lot of the rest of the country, they're battling with a cost of living crisis.
Well, the reason that PETA is doing this campaign that's celebrating British farmers is to show them that they don't need to be dealing with the heartbreak and violence of slaughtering animals. They can transition to growing plant-based crops instead, which we know are, you know, better for the environment, kinder to animals, and are good for farmers as well. So it's so easy. We can all support British farmers by simply going vegan.
But not everyone wants to go vegan. I don't want to go vegan.
Well, we know that millions of people already are vegan.
How do you know there are millions of vegans?
There's countless studies and polls which are showing the booming rise, and you just have to go to your local supermarket or favourite restaurant and see all the vegan options on the menu, and that's because of supply and demand. And that's another point that we're making. You know, the more people who stop drinking cow's milk, the less cows then need to be bred in order to produce it, and then this gives farmers time to transition into crop farming instead.
But aren't crop farmers also struggling with the same issues about mental health as dairy farmers, beef farmers?
Well, the studies were regarding, farmers overall, but when you think about what farmers have to deal with on a daily basis...
So if it was farmers overall, sorry to interrupt, if it was farmers overall, haven't you just interpreted this the way you want to?
Well, we know that
You've put a bit of spin on
the majority of farmers are still having to deal with mutilating animals, cutting the beaks off chickens, cutting the tails off piglets, having to deal with animals dying day to day from disease like the bird flu you mentioned, the swine flu outbreaks that we've seen, cold conditions, the heat waves that we had during the summer, which were unprecedented. This is a really tough and dirty business, frankly, that does take a toll on farmers. And that's why PETA is just showing them that it doesn't have to be this way. There is an alternative, and it's an alternative that consumers want as well.
I'm still not sure how you can prove conclusively that the breakdown of farmers, dairy, beef, arable, who are struggling with mental health issues, I've looked at the figures, how have you concluded
I think you're looking a little
dairy?
Too much into the nuances of this study. Overall, we know that farmers are having a tough time.
Lots of people are.
And a solution could be to transition into growing something that is better for the environment and that doesn't involve animals, and that is the direction that the future is going. This isn't just PETA saying this. The United Nations is encouraging people to move towards a plant-based diet to reduce the worst effects of climate change. And British farmers can play a part in this by making a transition that will happen over time. We're not expecting this overnight. And it's a transition that benefits everyone.
You'll be on to the fish farmers next.
Well, I mean, absolutely, of course. We want fish farmers to be farming seaweed instead, and there's already some amazing vegan seaweed that is being farmed right here in the UK. And they support PETA's campaign in encouraging...
So seaweed could replace our fish stocks as an alternative industry for our fish farmers?
Absolutely, why not?
I'm not sure. Would it be economically viable?
Well, of course, the nitty-gritty of that is beside the point, but we do know that...
No, it's not beside the point, because farmers are depressed already. If they're going to run a business which doesn't make any money because they're doing seaweed and there's not the demand for it, that's going to make them even more
well,
depressed.
there is. I mean, seaweed is a health food, it's high in protein, it's very nutritionally dense. And again, this is not something we're saying is going to happen overnight, but we are overfishing the world's oceans to a point where it's almost beyond repair. And it's something that we're really going to have to start rethinking for the future of the planet, and not for our generation, but for, our children's generation. And it's something that British farmers can get behind, including fish farmers as well.
What do you have to eat on a typical day as a vegan? What did
In
you
a
have for
typical
breakfast?
day? Oh, what a
No eggs, of course.
question.
No eggs.
No, so I would start with oat milk porridge with fruits, peanut butter for breakfast.
Right.
And then lunch would maybe be like some sort of broccoli and vegan chicken stir fry. And then dinner would be like roasted potatoes with another type of vegan chicken and some spinach. And then I would probably have some ice cream for dessert.
Right. Do you find it difficult to go into a restaurant with friends who may be eating meat?
No, not at all. But usually when people see what I order at the restaurant, they're like, oh, that looks really good. And they kind of wish that they'd also got that one. And it's great now. So many restaurants have vegan options. You could literally go into anywhere in London and you will find something delicious that did not involve the slaughter of any animals.
Is that you say in London, but if you were living in a small town in Wales, are you going to have these same vegan options?
Oh, absolutely.
Are you sure?
Yeah, one of my colleagues lives in a tiny village in Wales, and there is a vegan cafe there, and it serves the most amazing food. I'm from Edinburgh. It is probably the UK's most vegan-friendly city. You really can be anywhere these days. And I'd love for you to try some as well, if it's something you've not had yet.
I mean, what did I have for dinner last night? I had pasta. I'm afraid there was some...
Well, a lot of pasta is vegan.
Yeah. But can I ask you, where does Britain stand in the vegan league table? Are we doing, in your eyes, very well or very badly?
Oh, we're doing incredibly well in terms of what is on offer in supermarkets and what is on offer in restaurants. But in terms of farming, we could be doing so much more in order to support Britain's farmers. And if it's industries that they're getting more involved in, then, that benefits everyone because that consumer demand is there. And then business can be booming for farmers as well.
When did you eat your last piece of meat or fish?
Oh, goodness, it was probably around 8 or 9 years ago now, so a very long time.
Was there a Paul on the road to Damascus conversion moment when you thought, that's it, no more?
Yes, I actually read a book called Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. It's an amazing book. I would highly recommend it. And it really just got me thinking about the mass scale of how many animals are slaughtered for a fleeting moment of taste for a sandwich, you know, and it was something that I just did not want to be a part of anymore.
Do you think if I read it, I'd become a vegan?
I think you might, you know. I think you might.
I just don't think I could ever give up bacon sandwiches.
Well, you know, a lot of people say that, but you can get vegan bacon now, which tastes identical. I will send you some, and you can do a taste test. You can do a taste test, and it's incredible.
Perhaps we could have a tasting session here at GB News.
I would love that. Yeah, I can bring in a host of things for you to try, and we can get your thoughts.
All right. Do you fry it or do you grill it?
You can do either, but frying is a bit crispier. So.
Right. And you have to be careful with the oil you use, I suppose.
No, just vegetable oil.
Right. OK. Well, look, we're talking about those farmers. What your view about that is. That is Jennifer White from the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, more commonly known as PETA. Thanks for coming in and joining us. We're going to now get to find out what's happening with the weather. Tim Rice, by the way, is joining us, the legendary lyricist. He's going to be here with me for an hour talking about his new musical, and he'll tell you all about it. Before that, the weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Cracking day out there, if you like fine, bright weather through the autumn months. Lighter winds than we've been used to as well, thanks to a little ridge of high pressure. Don't get too used to it. Big area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. That deep low is staying away, but it is throwing these weather fronts towards us for tomorrow. Ahead of that, though, as I said, most places having a fine day. There are a few showers, which will keep going across parts of Cumbria, west coast of Scotland, across the far north of Scotland too, even one or two across Wales and southwest England this morning, but they're few and far between, and they'll fizzle out this afternoon. So many central and eastern areas certainly staying dry with sunny spells. And in that sunshine, temperatures getting close to average. Bit of a chill in the air first thing this morning, but feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. It is cooler than it has been, but it is going to turn milder as we go through the weekend into next week. Certainly not that mild if heading out this evening. However, for most it's going to be dry and clear, and under those clear spells it will turn quite chilly. But here comes the rain into Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England by dawn. As the rain moves in, temperatures will start to pick up again, but certainly across many eastern areas it will be a chilly start to Saturday. Could be some pockets of frost across northeast England and eastern Scotland. Maybe a bright start in the east if you're up early enough, but it won't last. The cloud will move in, bringing outbreaks of rain for many. Northern Ireland cheers up pretty smartly, and much of Scotland will actually have a brighter afternoon, and eventually West Wales may see some sunny spells, but elsewhere staying fairly dull. It will be a little milder than today, but it won't feel all that mild with the cloud, the increasing breeze. Now, we probably won't see much rain across East Anglia and the southeast till late on. But once it's arrived, it may well linger into the evening, so bear that in mind for Saturday evening, particularly if you've got plans to go to a firework display. Could be a bit of a soggy one across the southeast. Elsewhere, we'll see some showers, and that's how we go into Sunday. There'll be some sunny spells, but there will continue to be some pretty heavy showers around too.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Hello and welcome to my brand new show, Andrew Pierce. I'm with you right through until 3 p.m. and I'm going to be joined by the legendary lyricist Sir Tim Rice. He's got a new musical in the London's West End and he'll be with me for the next hour. We'll be talking politics, of course, and we'll be talking about the cost of living crisis is going to affect theatre and the West End, and politics because Suella Braverman, that Home Secretary, she's under fire again, visiting the so-called overcrowded, unsanitary Manson migrant facility in Kent. She took a military chopper. That's really upset people on the left. And it's not just the migrant crisis putting pressure on the government. The Bank of England hiked interest rates for the 8th time in a row yesterday, or the Prime Minister's chance to get a hold of the UK's crumbling economy. Plus, plans for Sizewell C. That's the nuclear plant. They're going ahead, it seems. After news, it might be axed. We got that news just this morning. It's expected to add to Britain's energy security. Many argue it's far too lengthy and expensive at that. All that and much more, so stay with me. And remember, I want to hear your views. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, your updated headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Andrew, thank you. Good afternoon. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 2, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, as many as 4,000 people were being held at the facility in Kent when it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. Number 10 says the Home Office is looking at what more can be done about capacity at the processing centre. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there'll be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February. Scotland's First Minister says she regrets delays in the delivery of 2 ferries, which are both late and over budget. The vessels are due to be delivered next year and early in 2024 at a potential cost of more than £300 million, 3 times the initial contract. Nicola Sturgeon's given evidence earlier before a committee of MSPs investigating their construction after Audit Scotland said there have been a multitude of failings.
Obviously, this is still a live project, regrettably so, and the Scottish Government remains absolutely committed to delivering both ferries and supporting our island communities that rely so heavily on vessels of this type on a daily basis.
2 people have been charged following disorder in Dundee on Halloween night. Emergency services, including riot police, responded to calls after bonfires and fireworks were lit on streets in the Kirkton area. A 28-year-old woman and a 15-year-old boy have been charged with alleged mobbing and rioting offences. Strike action by hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport could affect football fans heading to the World Cup in Qatar. Unite Union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. They include ground handling and cargo staff. The World Cup kicks off in just over 2 weeks, and the union says it expects Qatar Airways to be hit heavily by the strike action. The airline had put on extra flights for football fans. Twitter has started its mass sackings as it continues its major restructuring under new owner Elon Musk. Reports suggest as many as half of the firm's global workforce could be laid off as part of cost-cutting measures. Employees have been told they'll receive an email by 4 this afternoon telling them whether or not they've lost their job. Offices have been temporarily closed and the access badges of more than 7,500 staff members suspended globally as the company tries to cut costs by £1 billion annually. Donald Trump has dropped one of his strongest hints yet that he may run for the White House again.
In order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay? Very, very, very probably.
A pretty heavy hint there. Speaking to a crowd in Iowa, the former US president teased a strong possibility of a comeback. It's the first of 4 rallies in 5 days for the Republican as he campaigns for candidates in next week's midterm elections. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden will be rallying with former President Barack Obama on Saturday in Pennsylvania. The King is hosting a reception for business figures and NGOs ahead of COP27 in Egypt. More than 200 guests from across the globe are at the event being held at Buckingham Palace. Prime Minister's Rishi Sunak is among them after his U-turn on the climate summit, which he will now be attending. Next week's event comes as new figures show 205 elephants and scores of other wildlife have died as a result of drought over the past 10 months. Rain has finally arrived in the region, but forecasts show below average rainfall in Kenya in the coming months, raising fears that the threat to the country's wildlife isn't over. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew.
Thanks, Rihanna. Now, hello and welcome to my brand new show. I'm going to be with you every Friday lunchtime, and I want to hear your views. You email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll try to get some of you on. I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by the legendary lyricist Sir Tim Rice. He's got a fabulous new musical on in London's West End called From Here to Eternity. We'll speak to me in just a moment, but first, let's turn to our top story this afternoon. The delayed autumn budget now just 2 weeks away, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, they're under huge pressure to address that £50 billion black hole in the nation's finances. Guess what? They're looking at raising taxes even more on the sale of assets such as shares and property. They're also potentially going to introduce an increase in taxes on people's shared dividends in a move that would come as a blow to entrepreneurs and lots of people, actually. They're also reviewing large infrastructure projects, including a major high-speed rail line in northern England. That will go down well in the Red Wall. However, in the last hour, Downing Street has said the construction of the Sizewell C nuclear plant will go ahead after all. Well, let's cross over to Westminster now and speak to GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia.
Hello.
Olivia,
yes, the pictures...
Can I just interrupt? Sorry. There's also going to be no Stormont election before Christmas, the Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed. But if we could talk about the economy and that spending, it's November the 17th. It was delayed from Halloween, partly because they didn't want those awful headlines about Halloween and the cartoonist joy, but it's going to be more unremitting pain for all sorts of families, pensioners, the lot.
It does sound like it will be pretty much unremitting pain. We're being warned at the moment that the government is trying to make up a £50 billion black hole, as it's called, in public finances. And it's being threatened that they're going to do that with a mixture of 50% tax rises, so £25 billion worth of tax rises, and 50% public sector cuts. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration. At this time before a budget, we often see chancellors and prime ministers softening the ground, as it were. So when it comes to the actual budget, it may not be quite as bad as that. And the hope is that we'd all feel that we've actually been rather well done by. But it does look pretty painful. They're talking at the moment about raising capital gains tax, that tax on assets that are being sold. They're thinking about raising it in line with income tax. Obviously, very bad news for investors, savers, entrepreneurs. There's already been a big backlash against business leaders. But it's very hard to see what other wiggle room they have. They're going to raise corporation tax, which is something that both the Prime Minister and Jeremy Hunt said that they were going to lower during their election campaign. So it's hard to see how they're going to square that with the public. Then on the other side, in terms of public sector cuts, There's talk about them raising public sector pay by only 2%. Well, remember, of course, the unions are demanding a 10% rise in public sector pay in line with inflation. So that would go down very, very badly indeed. Although some in the private sector may feel that it's actually quite low-hanging fruit because, of course, private sector wages aren't rising by anything like as high as inflation. The other option, as was discussed in the bulletin, is the cuts to public infrastructure. Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, when they were in government, made a lot of promises about new infrastructure for the country, which is all part of that big levelling up agenda, which was obviously central to the Conservative 2019 manifesto and integral to the Conservatives winning the Red Wall. So again, making cuts there is going to be very, very, very difficult. Basically, whichever way the Chancellor and the Prime Minister turn, they come up against a big brick wall, and it feels as though any changes that they make are going to be pretty much politically unpalatable in the House of Commons.
One thing they can do, of course, we've already seen one windfall tax on the energy companies. We saw the huge profits made by BP this week. What was it, £7 billion for 1 quarter? They could apply another windfall tax. It would be hugely popular with the voters. And those banks are doing pretty well too. There could be a windfall tax on the banks. And before people throw their hands up in horror, they should be reminded that Mrs Thatcher, whom I was a great fan, in the 1980s had a windfall tax on the energy companies and the banks.
Yes, they could do that, and it looks like they probably will do that. Sounds like they're going to extend the windfall tax to 2028, I think it is, and raise it to up to 30%. I mean, the problem there is, of course, there are lots of pro-growth, Thatcherite, small c Conservatives who would absolutely hate that, who feel that it's just not a free market policy and that it'll prevent those big oil and gas companies, which are very important for employment in this country, it'll prevent them investing here. They'll just decide that they can go abroad. And if you bear in mind as well that Brexit was supposed to be a way of getting the UK setting its own tax laws to make it very, very competitive. So there are lots of people who would argue that that is totally not conducive to growth and not particularly right of a Conservative government. That said, I expect they will do that because it is a very easy way to get money into the Treasury coffers quickly, which is what they need right now.
All right, that's GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. Well, as trailed by me well in advance, in the studio with me is the legendary lyricist Sir Tim Rice. Now, Sir Tim, we're going to talk about your new musical in a moment, From Here to Eternity. But when you hear this litany of bad news on the economy, is it going to affect box office in the West End, at theatres up and down the country because families are struggling? Don't we think perhaps not go to the theatre?
I'm sure it will, absolutely. I'm not an expert in any way at all, but I can't imagine that going to see a musical will necessarily be number one priority for many people. I can say in sort of defence that on the other hand, if a great family musical like, say, Joseph or Six or something brings pleasure and joy into people's lives, then I'm all for it, and it could be money very well spent. But you're right, as obviously when everything's rather grim at the moment on the financial front, it is going to affect shows. I mean, the show we've got at the moment in London is actually in a very small theatre. It's not technically a West End production, even though the theatre itself is in the West End. But it's a small, perfectly formed theatre, the Charing Cross Theatre, and ticket prices we've kept as low as we can. But there's some wonderful young actors and so many people going into the business still, and if they can be supported by people going to the theatre, obviously I'm all for it.
Your life isn't made easier. Nobody's life's made easier in major towns and cities. A rail strike. We've got 2 or 3 days of rail strikes coming up. In London, the tube's going on strike on Thursday too. That is another blow to anybody trying to run a business, whether it's a shop or a shoe shine business, for instance. There's a cafe that I go to near the Home Office. Before the pandemic, he was selling 800 coffees a day. Since the rail strikes and post-pandemic, he's selling 150 a day. He had 8 staff, he's now down to 3. Rail strikes are no good for people like you.
No, it's interesting and a bit depressing that if there's a rail strike day, the box office advance is a lot lower, understandably. If you can't get into town, if you can't get into wherever your local theatre is, then people don't go. So that is something one has to put into the equation. The big shows, the ones that have been on forever, like Phantom of the Opera or The Lion King, seem to be holding up quite well, but often they've been booked so long in advance that people at the time obviously felt they could afford it, or else they're determined to keep to it, having invested, even if by sheer bad luck there happens to be communications problems on the day. But it is a major problem, and an awful lot of worthy projects in the theatre will struggle. And a lot of people may say, well, the theatre is just entertainment, and of course it is in one sense, but it's a very important part of people's lives. If you don't have entertainment, if you don't have books, if you don't have films, if you don't have music, life is not as good as it is, as it should be.
One upside for the economy in the decline in the value of sterling, which has gone down sharply against the dollar, which is king. The only currency, I'm told, that's gone up against the dollar currently is the Russian ruble, because the war criminal Putin's still able to sell so much energy and gas across the country. But whenever I go in a cafe or a tube or a bus in London, I hear American accents, because they're coming to London, they're coming to Britain because the dollar is king and they've got a lot more spending money.
Well, that may well be true. Interesting you should mention Russia, because we had a show running in Russia, Chess, recently, which was very successful. And halfway through its run, this terrible war started. So we immediately said to the producer and the director, take the show off. We don't want to be involved anymore. But the director, who has since wisely moved to the United States, said, no, we want to keep it on because we disapprove strongly of what is being done in our government's name. So the show then continued for quite a bit longer, and we do have quite a stash of rubles, which I guess we can claim, but we've said we don't want that, or we want to put it into some pro-Ukrainian charity.
You put the rubles you've got into something to help Ukrainian people?
Well, the ones we got before the war, we
sure.
paid to all the participants, and they've done what they would normally do with their income.
Yeah.
But this has given us an opportunity to stash up quite a sizable. I'm not quite sure what the size is, but it's certainly a decent sum which we feel we can use to help some Ukrainian cause.
Very good. Tim Rice, Sir Tim Rice, to give him his full title, he's going to talk to us about his new musical, From Here to Eternity, which is on at the Charing Cross Theatre. But also we're going to be talking about the fact there's no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, says he'll outline the steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin, of course, is criticising the government. The devolved government hasn't functioned since February, and the DUP is currently boycotting the formation of the ruling executive in protest against the ongoing chaos. Joining me now from Stormont is GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie. Dougie,
yes, good afternoon from
hello
Stormont.
To you. No election before Christmas. I talked to Arlene Foster, you know her better than me, the former DUP First Minister. She didn't really sense there was much chance of any real progress or breakthrough.
No, and it is the feeling here right across the board, the political board, simply because that 24-week legislation that was in place, of course, from the first time that a government has to be formed from an election, they've 24 weeks, and then that legislation said that they had to dissolve the government, and that happened here last Thursday night. The ministers, the last of the ministers here from the former administration were still in place, and they were running departments, and they were taken out of here. But Heaton-Harris, of course, he put that ultimatum on the table, and it's a problem with an ultimatum. Once you put it on the table, and that goes in anything in life, if you don't use it, it can usually be used against you, and it's a credibility issue that now comes down to what does he do with Northern Ireland. He can't put those ministers back in place here, we don't believe, even if he legislates for it, because it would be a new government, a new mandate, and therefore the Speaker would have to be elected behind us to put new ministers into place. And of course the DUP are not going to elect a speaker until the protocol issues are very much looked at and sorted out. So he does find himself in a bit of trouble here. He finds himself with a massive hole in the budgets here, just like most of the way through Great Britain. We've talked about the economic problems that are coming down the line. They face us here as well. And it doesn't appear that devolved institutions, whether they're up or not, can actually help us with that, because they don't have any fiscal powers here in Northern Ireland. They can't raise taxes, it's one block grant, and that's shared amongst different departments. So Heaton Harris is now going to have to look after those departments himself, and you have to ask, does he have the staff in the NIO to do that? And what is he going to do with the protocol? Because no matter if he has an election or not, it's still going to come back. The same parties are going to come back, and the protocol, with all its problems, is still going to be there. But I did go up into Stormont this morning. There's a few of the nationalist parties that would be pro-protocol, and they were saying things like, well, as long as we don't lose the benefits of the protocol. And that is very reassuring for anybody, because what they're now saying is they also accept that there's going to have to be some negotiation on the protocol. Of course, that hasn't been done all over the summer since Liz Truss left. So that bill that's going through the House of Commons at the moment, it's been stalled in the Lords ever so slightly, will have to come back, and that will give the keys to the DUP. As long as there's no big, massively changing amendments on that when it comes back from the House of Lords, that will allow the DUP to go to their electorate and say, we have an enabling bill, if everything goes wrong, that will protect us against the worst of the protocol. And until that comes into place, Andrew, Chris Heaton Harris has a job on his hands.
That's GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie. Sir Tim Rice is still with me. We're going to be talking about his new show From Here to Eternity, and also about the plans for the Sizewell nuclear plant is going ahead. It's by no means cheap, and we'll be hearing from a nuclear expert on whether it's even worth it. But before that, a short break.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Andrew Pearce here with you. The Prince and Princess of Wales have been in Scarborough, spearheading support for young people's mental health and well-being. The Yorkshire town was visited by the future King and Queen, I love them, for their first ever Community Impact Day, which is designed to leave a lasting legacy on services there. Our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, he was also there.
It's not uncommon to see young royals supporting young people, but yesterday's visit to Scarborough was something different. Their popularity and willingness to pose for pictures was an added bonus for the crowds, but the real reason was a new idea designed to leave a lasting legacy and impact. For the first time, the Royal Foundation, which looks after Will and Kate's charity work, is piloting a new Community Impact Day. New funding made possible by their work will support young people's mental health.
Tackling that stigma, talking about mental health and providing services throughout the community are crucial to how we go forwards in dealing with mental health issues that many people face.
And it's teenagers themselves who will decide whether £345,000 of funding will go.
A lot of adults are making decisions for young people, so it was really lovely for young people to be making the decisions for themselves.
Adults don't understand the same problems because we're going through them problems firsthand right now, whereas adults are not.
I just think there needs to be more help. I think they need to step up the game a bit with mental health services. They don't really have any, they don't do anything.
It's hoped the impacts will be felt right across this seaside town, where almost 1/3 of its residents live in areas among the most deprived in England. The provision of mental health services in Scarborough are often not up to scratch, which means young people can find themselves stuck in a cycle where support is brief and barely helps. It's hoped the new funding will help supporters intervene early to prevent a young person's mental health reaching crisis point. The Sidewalk Youth Project is one of the organisations that supports young people in Scarborough and will benefit from the funding. Lisa Upton is a community wellbeing worker and thinks the provision of services in this seaside town isn't enough.
The effects of the pandemic, it's very difficult for young people to access support, and support doesn't tend to last very long. There's also a huge demand.
William and Catherine have championed mental health provision for years and want to deliver a lasting impact. In 2017, their Heads Together campaign encouraged more people to talk about their feelings and started seeking support as a result. It's understood their Royal Highnesses intend to pilot other community impact days next year, focusing on other issues they're passionate about. Carving out a footprint in the land Prince William will one day lead as king. Cameron Walker, GB News, Scarborough.
Don't you just love William and Kate? Now, the government has denied that the Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk is going to be scrapped amid spending cuts, to the disappointment of some local campaign groups. The total cost of the project could be around £20 billion. Should have been built years ago, frankly. And it's not expected to begin generating electricity until the early 2030s. The UK-French energy company EDF is expected to share the power plant in a move to remove dependence on Chinese nuclear power. Joining me now is Dr. Paul Dorfman from the University of Sussex, and he's chairman of the Nuclear Consulting Group, which analyses these issues. Good afternoon to you. Can I say, first of all, shouldn't this plant have been built years ago, Dr. Dorfman?
Well, looking at the numbers, I think that we can say through BEIS, the UK government advised, the UK government committee, that the numbers are, in terms of Hinkley, between 26 and maybe 30 billion. And in terms of when it may or may not come online, BEIS have stated quite clearly that it may not come online for another 17 years, which leads us to 2040, which may be seriously much too late for our current energy crisis or future energy crisis, and more importantly for our climate crisis.
Dr. Dorfman, doesn't that just sum up the fact we've not had a proper energy policy in this country for 30, maybe even 40 years? I mean, 17 years before this comes online and gives us any power?
Yeah, and of course, in terms of our colleagues across the channel, France has 28 nuclear reactors offline currently, with a 43 billion euro debt, which means that France Macron must now nationalise EDF, and they're facing a 100 billion euro reactor upgrade, Grand Carénage upgrade, which means that all of this may have significant impact on how far the French EDF corporation may be interested in the UK power generation market.
How important is it, just finally on this, Dr. Dorfman, that we keep the Chinese out of this?
Well, it's obviously clear that the Chinese must not be allowed into our energy infrastructure. That's a sine qua non. That's taken as given. And of course, unfortunately, the Chinese are, to a certain extent, already involved in Hinkley Point, and so all things taken into consideration, there are other better, quicker, faster, cheaper ways of doing this. In terms of the International Energy Agency, just published World Energy Outlook 2022, renewable energy is the most important way to reduce our cumulative emissions of CO2 on the electricity sector.
Right, that's Dr. Paul Dorfman. He's from the University of Sussex, and he's chairman of the Nuclear Consulting Group, which analyses issues. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's go back to Sir Tim Rice. You've got this musical, Tim. It's opening. It's open.
I was only going to say one thing about that fascinating chat.
Yeah.
17 years is a long time, but it will flash by.
Yes, very true. Quicker than we'd probably like to think about it.
I'm not quite sure whether I'm desperately concerned about what will happen in 17 years' time. Actually, I am, of course, for my children and grandchildren.
Yeah.
But, it is terrifying. You go back 17 years, which I should have worked it out before I began this sentence.
Yeah.
But if you go back to 2005, it seems like the other day.
Yeah. Tony Blair was in power then, Prime Minister.
I remember him.
Remember him?
Yes.
Yeah. We're going to talk a bit more at length after the break about your musical, but it's based on that very famous film.
Well,
From Here to Eternity.
It's not based on the film, technically. The film, From Here to Eternity, is a marvellous novel.
Yeah.
A prize-winning novel, a great American novel written by a great American author, James Jones.
Sure.
And it was made into that was 1951. And in 1953, it was made into a wonderful film by the director, Fred Zimmerman, and it won a load of Oscars.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean it's a great film, but that was a great film.
Yeah.
Is a great film. And it starred Robert Mitchum, Deborah Carr, Burt Lancaster, Donna Reed.
Great cast.
Fantastic cast. And Frank Sinatra made a big career comeback as an actor. He was slightly fading he'd been a huge teenage Bobby Soxer star, obviously phenomenal talent, but his career was slightly on the skids, but he was determined to play that role, and he begged and pleaded, and in the end he got the role and he won an Oscar for it, and then his career just went whoosh. And it's a great movie, but the movie was not what we had to get the rights of, because the film itself had got the rights from the book. And so when Stuart Brayson, the composer and the chap who had the idea for this musical, when he came to me and said, I've written a score for From Here to Eternity, it's fantastic. And I said, great, but have you got the rights? He went, rights? And I said, well, From Here to Eternity is a, and I think he'd based it largely on the film originally. And I said, well, if you want me to get involved, we'll have to get the rights. I can't just get involved in something and then be sued by somebody without permission. And it meant going back to the agents of the book. And I went back to them, and we got the rights to make a musical of the book. And that's what our show is.
We're going to come back to that because we've got to go to headlines. You're listening to me, Andrew Pearce, and watching me and listening to on the radio too. Lots to come in the final half hour of my brand new programme. More strikes, this time at Heathrow, how it could affect England fans and travel to the World Cup in just 2 weeks' time. But first, your news update with Rhiannon Jones.
Andrew, thank you. It's coming up to 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Downing Street has confirmed the number of asylum seekers at the Manston Migrant Centre has fallen to 2,600. At one point, the facility held as many as 4,000 people when it's supposed to have a maximum of 1,600. The Home Office says it's looking at what more can be done about the capacity at the facility. The Northern Ireland Secretary has confirmed there will be no Stormont Assembly election before Christmas. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll make a statement on the next steps in Parliament next week. Sinn Féin says the decision should have been made a week ago and described the delay as an example of classic Tory chaos. Unite says Qatar Airways will be one of the airlines affected by hundreds of workers striking at Heathrow Airport in the run-up to the World Cup. The airline had extra flights scheduled during the tournament. The union says up to 700 members of staff will walk out for 3 days from November the 18th in a dispute over pay. And King Charles has been hosting a reception to discuss tackling climate change as global leaders prepare for COP27 in Egypt. More than 200 politicians and campaigners from across the globe have been at the event at Buckingham Palace, among them the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, after his U-turn on the climate summit, which he will now be attending. And some breaking news in the last few minutes. A number of British citizens have been caught up in a hostage situation in South America. The Foreign Office says it's in contact with the local authorities and says a very small number of British nationals are involved in an incident in Peru. It's understood that a tourist boat had been caught up in a protest. It says it's monitoring the situation closely. More on that in later bulletins. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew's back in just a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Strikes everywhere. This time, hundreds of workers at Heathrow Airport going on strike in dispute over pay. It's going to hit football fans going to the World Cup in Qatar. The finals kick off in just over 2 weeks, and the Unite Union says it expects Qatar Airways to be hit heavily by the three-day strike action starting on November the 18th. The airline had extra flights scheduled during the tournament. Joining me now at Heathrow is Kevin Hall, Regional Officer at Unite the Union. Kevin, do you hate football?
Yeah, first of all, Andrew, good afternoon. I'm honoured to be on your first show.
We're very pleased to have you. Can I ask again, do you hate football because you're going to seriously disrupt football fans' plans to go to the World Cup, to cheer on England, and let's not forget Wales?
Well, you couldn't have picked a more indifferent person to ask about football. I've got no issues with football whatsoever. I'm not a supporter at all.
Why are you doing it at this time then? Because you know the Qatar airline is going to be adversely affected. Is it just to get more publicity?
You've heard this expression before, Andrew. You know what I'm going to say. There's no good having strike action if it's not effective, and our strike action will be effective. But let's be very clear. I mean, this is a last resort. We don't want to take this action. We're being forced to take this action.
Say that. Kevin, you keep saying it's a last resort. We don't want to take this industrial action. Unite appear to be on strike all the time.
Well, Unite may be on strike all of the time, but at the end of the day, I can only speak in relation to Heathrow and what I'm doing.
Do you not feel any guilt that hundreds of football fans who've saved up thousands of pounds, been looking forward to this event for months, if not years, and some of them won't get there at all?
Well, what I'm more focused on now, Andrew, is our members and our members' ability to be able to pay their bills in this cost of living crisis. And these multi-million-pound companies that can afford these pay rises, that's what I'm more focused on.
What are you seeking?
Sorry, Andrew, I missed that.
What pay rise are you seeking?
Well, with inflation running at 12.6%, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect our members to be able to achieve an inflation pay rise. Because let's be perfectly honest about it, even if they were to achieve that sort of pay rise and keep their pay in line with inflation, it will do nothing at all for the cost of living crisis that is affecting them. With the energy bills, the food, petrol, it will do nothing.
Well, people might contradict your assessment of the inflation rate, because I think the government would say it's 10.1%, but let's not split hairs. What have you been offered?
RPI is at 12.6, Andrew.
All right, well, what have you been offered? What's on the table?
In relation to which company? Because at the moment...
what's going on at Heathrow? What's going on at Heathrow? What have they been offered?
Well, there are three companies at Heathrow that we're currently negotiating with. One of them, Menzies Ground Handling, has offered our members a 2% increase of new money. This is on the back of the disgraceful behaviour that they embarked upon during the COVID crisis, where they took upon firing and rehiring 810 of our members. So it's hardly surprising that these members that lost tens of thousands of pounds are now looking to address this issue through this pay claim. In relation to Menzies Cargo Trucking, they've been offered a 5% increase. In relation to Donata, well, Donata are making big capital of the fact of the monies that they've been offered over the last few years. But we need to put this into some kind of context, in as much that our members haven't received pay rises for years. So the money that they've been advertising and putting out in their press releases must be taken into consideration. They didn't have pay rises for 2 years. So the offer that they're making us of 6% is not sufficient.
All right, and just to be quite clear, Kevin, you've timed this dispute at this time specifically because you know it's going to disrupt the World Cup for British fans.
We have offered it, and we are still working with all of these companies to try to avoid...
You haven't answered the question, Kevin. Could you answer the question? You said you want to make maximum impact, maximum publicity. You've timed it because of the World Cup.
That was more that was not by pre-planning. That was by the fact of the way in which the negotiations have worked out.
It's a coincidence then, is it, the World Cup?
No, we can't. It's not a coincidence. We've been known about the World Cup for months. You know that.
Yeah. So can we go back again? This is being timed specifically because of the World Cup.
At the end of the day, as I've made it very clear to you, it's no good taking strike action if it's not effective action.
Right, so football fans watching this know what they think of Unite.
Well, a lot of your football fans are probably some of our members of our union, and are also experience the same hardships that our members are facing right now. And I'd suggest some of them might be very sympathetic to this view.
All right, Kevin, I'm not sure they will be if they've paid thousands of pounds for those tickets, but thank you for joining me. That's Kevin Hall, Regional Officer at Unite the Union. Thanks so much for coming on. Now, let's have some light relief, Tim, after that. Are you a football fan, by the way? No, you're a great cricket fan.
I'm your man for light relief.
Yes, great cricket fan, of course, aren't you?
I love cricket, yes.
Yeah.
I like football. I mean, I followed soccer for a long time, but cricket is my...
It's not called soccer, it's called football.
This is
Sorry.
The sultry tones you heard on my left is Amanda Patel, my colleague from the Daily Mail, who's very welcome. We're going to talk to you in a moment, Amanda.
And I didn't go on strike.
I'm very glad. Let's talk about the musical. It's at the Charing Cross Theatre. Yep. It's based on the book. Tell us about the show.
Well, it's in a very small theatre, as I think I said earlier. It only seats 250, so if you want to go, you've got to book quickly. It's doing an 8-week run. It ran before in a much larger version about 9 years ago, and it got quite good reviews, including one 5-star review. I was amazed. I don't think I'd ever had one of those before. But it didn't do well financially. Normally, I get terrible reviews, and the show goes through the roof. Yeah. This time I got good reviews, and it went that way.
Oh dear.
I think I prefer the first option.
Of course.
But it is a good show. Stuart is a brilliant composer, and he's written a great score. And it was done in America. A very good American director named Brett Smock did it twice in the States, and it went well. Out of town, he didn't do it on Broadway. It was a smaller production, and we went to see it. It went really well down there. So he said, let's do it in London. But I said, well, yes, we've got to do it small. We don't want to go back to spending millions. And so we are doing it small in the wonderful Charing Cross Theatre, and it's doing 8-week run. And if it goes well, then maybe we can expand it and take it on a tour. I don't know. but it's a wartime story. I mean, the list of things that the audience are warned about is absolutely terrifying. You know, everything from war to blood to swearing to this, that and the other.
Heartbreak as well.
Who?
Heartbreak as well.
I'm sure it was heartbreak.
Yes, a lot of heartbreak in it.
Is that part of this sort of woke sort of thing, that you have to warn audiences?
You have to warn now audiences.
Oh, please.
But the funny thing is that everything that we are warned about in From Here to Eternity, including death and violence and suicide, all these things are in... it's a serious musical, with some humour, I hasten to add. But everything that's in From Here to Eternity was also in Jesus Christ Superstar 50 years ago.
One of my favourite shows of all time.
And I don't think we had to warn people then. I mean, if people go to the theatre, they should be grown up.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a grown-up show, obviously. And I don't think you should have to warn people, because you never know what people are going to be offended by. People might be offended by, you know, the colour of the seating.
Yeah. Well, I saw your fabulous musical Jesus Christ Superstar when it was performed at the Regent Park Open Air Theatre.
Yeah, that was quite recently.
Very recently. If that was being put on now in a major theatre, are you saying you'd have to warn people there is a death scene in there? It's called the crucifixion.
Well, you might. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't remember that happening in the Regent's Park version.
It didn't.
But that was, what, 4 or 5 years ago now. I don't know. It does seem a bit crazy. I mean, the only thing that hasn't been... I mean, the punters haven't been warned about in From Here to Eternity is may contain nuts. It hasn't got that.
Right.
Actually, you could argue it has got some nuts in it. You know, but it's a serious show. It's quite a, you know, it's a serious story. It's set in Hawaii. It features American GIs just before Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor bombing on December the 7th, 1941 is one of the climaxes of the show. So it's not a light-hearted thing, but on the other hand, I hope it's entertaining, and I hope it does justice to a magnificent novel.
Well, I'm going to go, and I might even go with my friend Amanda Patelli, who keeps belly aching from the sides. Have you heard her? Now, the former health... Tim, stay with us. The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who I personally think is an idiot, will soon be making his way, in fact, I think he's already there in Australia, to feature on the series of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, once used to the lavish interiors of Parliament before his wandering hands got the better of him. The inhospitable and harsh conditions of the Aussie jungle will no doubt come as a shock to the former minister. How will this impact UK politics? Have ITV overstepped the mark? Or are they simply bored of playing it safe, like their dubbed woke counterparts, the BBC's Strictly Come Dancing, which now features same-sex dance partners? Of course it does. Climate change activists. And we've still got somebody in there who's the first to be diagnosed with dwarfism. Some fans say the show's becoming too woke. One of those is the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, who joins me now. Tim Rice is still with me. Amanda, look, you and I both think Matt Hancock has made a terrible mistake going in the jungle. He should lose his parliamentary salary. He's going to potentially be paid between $350,000 to $400,000 because he wants to raise awareness of... what's he raising awareness of?
He's dyslexic.
Dyslexic. But we actually know he's gone in there to get a load of money. Yeah. His political career is over. But the one consolation I have in the fact he's gone in the jungle, it is a woke-free zone, unlike Strictly.
It is interesting, isn't it, that Ant and Dec seem to be able to get away with things that other shows can't. I mean, they are so politically incorrect because they're two very short people, not that we want to focus on short people a lot, two very short people who make really good gags. They can say and do whatever they virtually want. On a briefly serious note, I don't feel sorry for Matt Hancock's constituents. I feel sorry for his very, very private wife of 15 years, Martha, and for his 3 children. Because
they're going to be humiliated.
He's made this big thing about throughout his career saying, my family life's private. I wouldn't even let my children use social media. Well, wait for it, because they're just their life is going to be torture. They will not be able to move without seeing Dad humiliating himself, and I think it's really cruel. But let's not do cruel stuff.
Now,
let's do happy stuff.
Now, you and I have spent Sunday nights together watching Strictly, tomatoes on toast and a vodka.
Have you confessed that you are one of the very few members of the Amanda Patel's Super Strictly Come Dancing fan club?
We watch it.
Tomatoes on toast, but also something else.
And a vodka. In Amanda's case, a bottle of vodka. Tim,
That is so not true.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I drink the bottle. Tim, are you a Strictly fan?
I'm afraid I haven't actually seen any of this series. I really... And also, I saw the list of runners and riders somewhere, and Other than Tony Adams, I hadn't really heard of any of them.
Yep. Now, Tony Adams, though, the former
Tony Adams is
footballer,
absolutely fantastic.
Is he still in it?
And
Yeah.
he's still in it.
Yeah.
And he's gone from being the gag act. His performance last week. Now, I'm really sorry, but this shows where we actually know what we're talking about. He actually turned into a dancer, and it was really beautiful to watch. Unlike watching Jade Adams, the other Adams, the XXX-sized comedian I'd never even heard of, who made this whole thing. This is where it gets really woke. She made this whole thing about saying, you know, dancing should not just be about beautiful people. No one ever thought it was. She said it should be about people like me, and all their sob stories.
Because she is enormous. She's enormous.
Absolutely enormous. I mean, she is hippopotamus size. And then, of course, she can't dance, but she was kept in because they want, Strictly want these kind of woke narratives being fed through.
And of course, she danced with another woman.
But she's not that same sex. She chose that. She's not gay.
No, but it got her more publicity.
It got her more publicity because she used to dance with her sister who had died, so that gave her a backstory. So I've got all these things. But that poor little dancer that she was, it was like having a gazelle dancing with an elephant. It was not fair.
And there's also in the show the girl who won gold at the Paralympics.
Oh, Ellie. I mean, we all love Ellie Simmons. You know, she's just a fantastic athlete, but it slightly skews, and I suppose it is true to the original promise of Strictly that you teach someone who can't dance how to dance, but I don't know how...
Is she being judged, though, on the same criteria, would you argue, as others?
Of course she's not. You know, we both know that. We've watched it all.
Yeah.
And you can't... You know... She's great, we love her, and it's wonderful she's having this dancing experience. But I don't know how... I think that she's being given more favourable scores over other better dancers because they want to keep this narrative going. And, you know, even their same-sex male couple this year, it was, what's his name? It was the Radio 2 presenter, Richie Anderson, with the straight Giovanni, who's like sex on legs. Whereas in the original one, which was brilliant, the first ever same-sex one, and these are my total notes for the show, okay?
Look, they're dancing away there. They're dancing away.
You had John Waite, who was off Bake Off or something like that, and Johannes, who is gay. It was sublimely beautiful.
Right.
I mean, it was completely gorgeous. And then you put a gay guy with a straight guy, and they're kind of dancing right around like a couple of robots.
But Tim, talking of wokery, I mean, how widespread is it now in the theatre?
Well, I think it is. You know, it's there, and you know, a lot of actors and people in the theatre do have woke views.
Can you call them actresses still?
I don't know. I'm not sure. What you mean? Can I call female actors?
I remember seeing Joan Collins doing her one-woman show and asking from the audience, said, "Are you an actor or an actress?"
Well, it seems
she said, "I'm an actress."
It seems you can call them actresses if they're up for an award.
Right.
I mean, in theory, I suppose if everybody has to be an actor, then you should only have one category in things like the Oscars.
Yeah.
But isn't that a kind of weird thing? Because actor is a male description. So why would women... I mean, please don't think I'm being a kind of woke woman here, fighting for feminism, but why would you want to sublimate your identity as an actress to begin going with a job lot as an actor? Does that mean that actors are better than actresses?
I don't know, but
I wouldn't know. I mean, it seems to me that the word actress is not an insult, I would have thought. I would have thought it was a delightful description of a very worthwhile job.
Amanda and I, some years ago, interviewed Mark Thompson, who was the Director General of the BBC, and he said Strictly was the best thing the BBC had done in 20-odd years. They don't do a lot of great stuff these days, in my view, because families could watch it. How important is it that families do take part in entertainment? Families come to your shows?
Well, yes, I'm all in favour of family shows, but I can't really speak about Strictly because I'm afraid I don't really watch it.
No.
Yeah, but Strictly originally was... I can remember the first time I saw Strictly, and I went into the office and I said to my then editor, I've just seen a show that's going to transform Saturday night TV. And he said, what's it about, Mandy? He called me Mandy. What's it about, Mandy? And I said, it's all these people in gorgeous ball gowns who can't dance like me, going on this show and learning how to dance. It's everyone's dream. And I was offered to go on the show 3 times. And he said that if I did go on the show, he would sack me. And I said, why would you do that? It turned out to be this huge hit. And he said, because You're so graceless. And they just humiliate you and you'd be off like the middle-aged lady in the first week.
I don't wish to break a confidence here, Tim, but Amanda Patel
Be careful.
Cannot dance. She has 3 left feet.
Right, well, she's probably better than me. I can't dance.
You can't dance either.
No,
So if she did...
I can do an Elvis wiggle.
If she did get an Elvis wiggle, should we ask you to do it
No,
now?
no.
I'm sure. But, because I've got quite a good wiggle. But Amanda, you are, as a dancer, bad on an epic scale.
I would get better. You see, the thing is,
that's
I
the
once danced with Anton de Beck, and he said, as he gripped me tightly, I mean, God, they really grip you tightly. He said, I could teach you to dance. Even you, he said, I could teach to dance. So don't give up on me, Andrew.
No, I won't.
I'll never come on your show again.
No, well, we'd like to.
I don't come here to be humiliated.
We've only got 40 seconds left, Tim. Just remind us, your show, From Here to Eternity, where is it?
Where is it? Good question. Charing Cross Theatre in the middle of London, underneath Charing Cross Station.
And you
can hear the tubes. If you're a tube train fan, you get the odd tube train coming through.
And Amanda, finally, who's going to win this year, Strictly? Will it be a woke winner?
I reckon it's that guy, Hammer, the guy with the really long hair. He's a brilliant dancer, but yeah, I really want Tony Adams to win. And he's got all of Arsenal voting for him.
Which is quite clever.
Which is really fantastic. I would love him to win. I'd love to see the
And you're a
loser,
Tottenham fan.
I am. No, I'm a Spurs fan.
Yeah.
I would love to see someone who, like me, you describe as totally hopeless to succeed.
Which football team do you support, Tim? You did tell us.
Sunderland.
Oh, Sunderland.
Yes, long way away, but...
What division are they in?
They're in the Championship. They're doing quite well. They're just on the way back to glory.
Always optimistic.
I'm actually going to Sunderland University with my old sparring partner, Kevin Maguire, soon to talk to the students about the joys of journalism.
OK. That'll be a brief talk.
Exactly. Well... She loves me, really.
I love him dearly.
You've been watching me, Andrew Pearce, here on GB News. Thank you so much for watching my first show. I'm going to be back next Friday at 12 noon. I want to thank Sir Tim Rice with his wonderful show From Here to Eternity. Amanda Patel, who will be going back now to writing a column Saturday, highlight of the Daily Mail. I'll be back at Friday at 12. Don't go anywhere, though, because up next, it's The Briefing with Arlene Foster, Dame Arlene Foster, soon to be Baroness Arlene Foster. You won't want to miss it. Before that, the weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many of us having a fine Friday, but tomorrow will bring something different.